Chapter 141. The waiters in the lobby all ran out when they heard the noise. Only, their curiosity had sped up their deaths. Bang, bang, bang. Each time Old Man Ji-een moved his finger, a life would die in his hands. In the blink of an eye, a dozen lives had been lost. Their deaths were as ugly as usual. Their bodies had exploded and a mist of blood filled the air. Immediately, the guests of the Eastwood Inn went into an uproar. When they saw this situation, each of them revealed an aghast expression as if they had seen a ghost. They all jumped out of the window and tried to escape. Old Man Ji-een said coldly, "You want to leave?" He shook both of his sleeves, and white lights continuously shot out from his hands. It was as if there was a heaven and earth hidden in his sleeves. Suddenly, a huge wave of destructive energy rushed out like a surging tide. Boom! The entire Eastwood Inn suddenly exploded with a loud rumble. Instantly, the entire Eastwood Inn had turned into ashes. It was as if it had been pulled out from this world and turned into ashes. In the blink of an eye, the innkeeper, waiters, and guests of the Eastwood Inn, who numbered at least 100, were transformed into ash along with the inn itself. Old Man Ji-een sneered and walked forward in large strides. "There's also the oil mill, the property of the Eastwood Qin." Old Man Ji-een thought. Currently, Qin Wushuang was taking a stroll with Emissary Liu and the martial saint on the martial arts practice field. Suddenly, their expressions changed as they looked toward the direction of the Eastwood Inn. Almost at the same time, the expressions of these three changed. "Let's take a look." Qin Wushuang took the lead. Emissary Liu and the martial saint glanced at each other and followed. Before the oil mill of the Qin family, Old Man Ji-een's face was gloomy. With his palm facing up, a ball of serene fire appeared on his palm. He raised his arm and threw it at the oil mill. Instantly, the fire on his palm turned into a monstrous sea of fire and pressed down from the sky. Boom! Covered by this fire, the oil mill was instantly engulfed by this sea of fire and turned into a raging inferno. There were more than a dozen workers in the oil mill. They were surrounded by this unexpected disaster. Immediately, they were burned until they were wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves. TSK, the taste of a sea of fire is not bad, right? If you want to blame someone, you can only blame yourselves for being in Eastwood Town. Blame yourselves for being dogs of the Qin family. Old Man Ji-een's tone was filled with resentment. Suddenly, his face turned cold and his eyes flashed with joy. He turned around and looked behind him. Qin Wushuang shot over, glaring at Old Man Ji-een. Looking at the scorched earth, he asked hoarsely, "Old Man Ji-een?" Old Man Ji-een's face turned gloomy and a cold glint shot out from his eyes. "You are a disciple of the Qin clan." "Old Devil Ji-een, why did you kill these innocent civilians when you were looking for trouble with the Qin family?" Qin Wushuang's tone carried a wave of uncontrollable anger. The person in charge of this giant oil factory, Uncle Shui, was a loyal servant that had followed the Qin clan for a few dozen years. Qin Wushuang had always been loyal and devoted. His heart was filled with pain and hatred. "Innocent?" Old Man Ji-een said coldly. "Since he is related to the Qin family, then he is not innocent. Son of the Qin clan, have my eldest disciple, Li Wuji, been here before?" At this moment, the martial saint and Emissary Liu both arrived. Emissary Liu shouted, "Old Man Ji-een, listen to me." Sneering coldly, Ji-een sized the martial saint and Emissary Liu from head to toe. Then, he clicked his tongue. "2 more Upper Sky warriors? Good, just in time. 3 Upper Sky warriors will be buried with my eldest disciple. Wuji, you will not be lonely when you go to the underworld." His devilish tone was accompanied by flickering eyes. Apparently, this Old Man Ji-een was about to go berserk at any moment. Qin Wushuang and the martial saint both focused their attention on him. However, Emissary Liu shouted, "Ji-een, before you make a move, you better know my identity." "Identity?" Ji-een laughed eerily. "What's so special about your identity?" The martial saint shouted, "This Emissary Liu is the emissary of the Stargaze Palace. Old Devil Ji-een. Although your Ji-een sect is tyrannical, Would you dare to go against the will of the Stargaze Palace? Stargaze Palace? Stunned, old man Ji-een sized Emissary Lu from head to toe and asked, "Are you really an emissary of the Stargaze Palace?" "Of course. Ji-een, I don't know what grudge you have with the Qin family. However, before you make a move, you better wait. A few days ago, I already sent a letter to the Stargaze Palace. For sure, someone from the 5 Palace Masters will come to judge your rights and wrongs." The name of the Stargaze Palace was something that old man Ji-een could not help but fear. Hearing these words, old man Ji-yin's face became gloomy. Apparently, he had fallen into deep thought. He must admit that he could not resist any of the Palace Masters from the Stargaze Palace. They all had enough power to kill him. The power of the Stargaze Palace did not only come from the existence of the 5 Palace Masters. Their power came from all aspects and was overwhelming. In the great Luo Empire, whoever went against the Stargaze Palace would be digging their own grave. Including him, old man Ji-een would not be an exception. The Stargaze Palace Master has come to this remote place? Emissary Lu, I am curious, why? Could it be that this Eastwood Qin is related to the Stargaze Palace? Emissary Lu shook his head in surprise. This Marquis Wu Shuang is the champion of the martial arts student exam in the great Luo Empire. He is a talent appointed by the Stargaze Palace. This time, the 5 Palace Masters had sent me to take him to the Stargaze Palace to meet the 5 Palace Masters. Ji-een, your head disciple, Li Wuji, had come to provoke and kill people. Since he was not skilled enough, he would be digging his own grave. If you remain stubborn and offend the Palace Masters, I am afraid you will not escape this calamity. Old man Ji-yin's face sank. Will not escape this calamity? With your threats, I will send you to the afterlife, even if I have to risk offending the Stargaze Palace. Emissary Lu's expression changed as he shouted, Ji-een, you are stubborn. Not to mention your self-destruction. The hundreds of people in your Ji-een sect will all be destroyed. Although old man Ji-een was furious, he had no choice but to weigh the pros and cons. If he were to make a move today, even if he killed these 3 people, most likely the entire Ji-een sect would be destroyed. As for Extreme Darkness himself, he could very well escape out of the country and seek refuge with another empire. With his skills, it would not be a problem for him to seek refuge with a major powerhouse. However, there were 6 of his favorite disciples in the Ji-een sect. Among the 7 Xiantian disciples, there were 6 other people besides Li Wuji that he had to consider. Once he killed and escaped today, he would not be able to take care of those 6 disciples. And Emissary Lu had already said that he had sent a letter back to the Stargaze Palace. Since he had done this, it would not be difficult to find out. In that case, it would be impossible for him to return to the Ji-een Mountain to take away those 6 Upper Sky disciples. After weighing the pros and cons, he would still consider the consequences of killing these 3 people and sacrificing 6 disciples. He tried hard to suppress the anger inside his heart. He thought, now even the Stargaze Palace has stepped out to protect this kid. Today I will kill him. How could the Ji-een sect remain unharmed when their nest is overturned? This kid admitted that he had killed my head disciple. He will not escape death. Only today I cannot do it. When the forefather returned to the Ji-een sect, he would send a few of his trusted disciples out of the territory. Then he would come back to kill the entire Qin family. By that time, after the forefather had killed all of them, he would leave and go to the Heavenly Lake Empire. Even if it's the Stargaze Palace, what can they do to me? With this thought, the extreme, old ancestor revealed a strange smile. With a fake smile on his face, he praised, no wonder you are the palace emissary from the Stargaze Palace. You have such courage and courage. I'm deeply impressed. Since it's the Stargaze Palace that has stepped out, for this matter, I can give them some face. However, since that kid killed my head disciple, he should at least do something, right? He was retreating in order to advance. He planned to calm the other party and not let him become suspicious. In this way, he could easily move his 6 trusted disciples without being watched. Once he had finished moving them, it would be the time for him to slaughter the entire Qin family. Qin Wushuang said with a cold sneer, do something? You've killed many of my subordinates, and destroyed many of our foundations? What do you want to do?" Old Man Jean said with a cold sneer. "How could these stupid villagers be compared to my upper sky disciples?" This unreasonable attitude made Qin Wushuang extremely annoyed. Inwardly, he had already made up his mind to kill this old man Jiyin. Only, he also knew that with his current strength, there was still a huge gap between him and this old man Jiyin. It would not be easy to take revenge today. Naturally, Emissary Liu would not allow their conflict to continue to escalate. He immediately stepped out to mediate. "Jiyin, Marquis Wushuang, I have a suggestion. How about you listen? Speak." Old man Jiyin said with an eerie smile. "The grudge between you guys is nothing more than some small conflicts. Now, both sides have suffered casualties. It's better to squash enmity than keep it alive. Regarding this matter, why don't you two accompany me to the Stargaze Palace and explain before the 5 palace masters to bury the hatchet? Even if we cannot resolve this grudge, we should set a rule on how to take revenge and how to settle the score. How about it?" On the surface, this idea seemed fair. In fact, it favored Qin Wushuang. After all, Qin Wushuang's current strength was far inferior to the genetic elder. He did not have the power to kill the people around Old Man Jiyin. How could Old Man Jiyin not understand this layer of meaning? Yet he did not expose it. Since he already had an idea, of course, he would not hesitate to deal with it half-heartedly. He said with feigned civility, "Since the 5 palace masters have stepped out, I will give them some face. Emissary Liu, it's decided." "Marquis Wushuang, what do you think?" Emissary Liu asked. Of course, Qin Wushuang would not believe that the eccentric and vicious old man Jiyin would be so easy to talk to. For sure, there would be complications in this matter. However, it would be a good thing if they could lure old man Jiyin out of the Bayou country. Immediately, he nodded. "Since Emissary Liu has spoken, I would not dare to disobey." Old man Jiyin laughed, and suddenly, he said, "If that's the case, I will return to the great Luo Empire first. Emissary Liu, see you at the Stargaze Palace." Emissary Liu replied, Sure. Like a gust of wind, the body of that old man Jiyin disappeared into the sky as soon as he turned around. It was as if he had evaporated into waves of smoke. He came and went like the wind and was unpredictable. Instantly, the 3 initial stage warriors felt their tensed nerves loosen as the pressure had disappeared. The pressure that old man Jiyin had given them was too strong. It was so strong that they did not dare to let down their guard, even when they were answering him. P.S. Today's update might be late. However, I will finish the 4 chapters before midnight, for sure. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 142. After old man Jiyin had brought a bloody disaster to the Eastwood town, he had left. This made Qin Wushuang extremely depressed. Inwardly, he held his breath. Strength. It was this difference in strength that allowed this old devil Jiyin to act so impudently. He killed people as he pleased and retreated as soon as he killed them all. Today, if Emissary Liu had not been present, and without the name of the Stargaze Palace, most likely the entire Eastwood town would have turned into a slaughterhouse from hell. From the way the old devil Jiyin had killed people, one would know that he was an extremely vicious person. When he killed people, he would not show any mercy. Today, he had retreated because he feared the power of the Stargaze Palace. From a reaction of the old devil Jiyin, it was clear that he had planned to cut off all means of retreat. If Emissary Liu had not stopped him and pointed out his weakness, most likely the old devil Jiyin would not have cared to fight them on the spot. Looking at the ghostly figure of the old devil Jiyin, most likely they would not have much chance of winning even with the help of the 3 of them. This old monster extreme could be considered a peak existence within the middle spirit realm. It was rumored that he had already started to break into the advanced stage. His strength was not something an initial stage warrior like them could compare to. Now, the people of the Royal Qin had also arrived after hearing the commotion. Each of them was dumbstruck as they looked at the ruins of the Eastwood Inn. They could not utter a single word. What kind of terrifying, destructive power is needed to create such a tragic situation? That Eastwood and occupied such a vast area, yet had been razed to the ground? Wushuang, what kind of enemy came? The Shiming looked at this tragic scene with lingering fear. Brother-in-law, it was the old devil Jiyin, but he had already retreated. Qin Wushuang did not hide it. With a solemn expression, the Shiming could not speak for a while as he looked at this tragic scene. Leave some people to command the fire. The rest of you, return to the manor. Qin Wushuang ordered. When he returned to the manor, Qin Wushuang had a lot on his mind. After the disturbance caused by the old devil Jiyin, he was in an extremely bad mood. The loss of property was secondary. So many lives were lost just like that. In front of a Xiantian old monster, the lives of ordinary people who didn't have any martial arts skills were actually so fragile. This made Qin Wushuang feel for the first time that his strength was still far too weak. Emissary Liu comforted him. Marquis Wushuang, don't worry. That old freak Jiyin had entered the Xiantian realm for at least 100 years, and his lifespan was at least 200 years old. And you're not even 20 years old. His potential was many times greater than his. If this old man Jiyin could not enter the advanced stage before the age of 300, for sure, he would become a faded flower that would not last long. But now, you are like the rising sun. Sooner or later, your radiance will overshadow the entire Jiyin sect. Unless old man Jiyin's brain is damaged, he shouldn't be your enemy. In the Tianxian continent, if a post-liminary realm martial artist had a long lifespan and a good cultivation, they would usually be over 100 years old. Once they entered the Xiantian realm, their lifespan would increase by another 50 to 100 years. In other words, the lifespan of an ordinary innate expert was 150. For example, the martial saint who had guarded the martial saint mountain for so many years had lived for more than 150 years. In fact, he was not far from the end of his lifespan. Unless he could break through the shackles and enter the middle stage of the spiritual martial force, he could increase his lifespan by another 50 to 100 years like old man Jiyin. This way, his lifespan would reach 250 years. This way, each time he advanced, he would gain another 100 years of lifespan. For the advanced stage, it was possible for him to live between 3 to 400 years. If he could not continue to break through, then after 40 years, he would reach the end of his lifespan. It would be unavoidable for him to die. And once he broke into the perfect stage, his lifespan would easily surpass 500 years. Truly, he would become an old demon. There were many such figures in the Tianxian Empire. Only at the level of the Bayou country, they would never come into contact with them. The martial saint knew Qin Wushuang better as he said, "Emissary Liu, Marquis Wushuang has always been optimistic. Surely, he would not feel dejected because of one setback. For sure, he must have some other knot in his heart." Martial saint, Emissary Liu. Qin Wushuang raised his head. Earlier, that old man Jiyin had clearly planned to cut off all means of retreat. Why did he suddenly stop when Emissary Liu mentioned the Jiyin sect? Could it be that this old devil Jiyin cared deeply about his sect? Emissary Liu nodded. In the great Luo Empire, the old devil Jiyin was famous for being protective of his disciples. He had many disciples, and the good and the bad were all mixed together. Most of them were lackeys of the Jiyin sect. The old devil Jiyin did not plan to let them become talents. His focus was to nurture his 7 upper sky disciples. Now, with Li Wuji dead, there are only 6 upper sky disciples left. I know that he values the Jiyin sect's bloodline very much, so I chose his weak spot and hit him in one fell swoop. Since this old devil Jiyin is so protective of his disciples, for sure, he would not let go of Li Wuji's death. Could it be that he had taken a step back to buy time? Could it be that he still has more thunderous methods? Qin Wushuang spoke his thoughts in detail. After a moment of silence, Emissary Liu and the martial saint had to admit that Qin Wushuang's guess was reasonable. With old man Jiyin's previous performance and his usual reputation, he was not someone who could accept the fact that he had suffered a loss calmly. This way, for sure, that old man Jiyin had gone back to arrange his escape route. When he had arranged his escape route, It would be the time for him to cause trouble again. The martial saint felt a headache. It was definitely not a lucky thing for the Bayou country to be targeted by a middle-stage warrior. These words reminded Emissary Lu. Senior Chio's words are reasonable. It seems that I must send another letter back to the Stargaze Palace. I must ask the 5 palace masters to monitor the Jiyin sect strictly and not allow them to make any movements. Or else, this matter will never end. Qin Wushuang also felt grateful when he saw Emissary Lu's concern. I will not say any pretentious words. I will remember your help. After counting the days, Emissary Lu's letter should have arrived in the Great Luo Empire. Finally, the martial saint bid farewell. Emissary Lu said, Senior Chio, for the martial arts student exam, Marquis Wushuang does not need to participate. For the other martial arts student from the Bayou country, I will need you to take a trip to the Great Luo. The martial saint said with surprise, Emissary Lu, could it be that this martial arts student exam is not only the will of the Great Luo Empire, is also the will of the Stargaze Palace? Emissary Lu sighed. It is the highest will of the Stargaze Palace. The Great Luo Empire is only executing it. I am not afraid of you laughing at me. Currently, within the Great Luo Empire, there is a serious shortage of talent. Even when the Stargaze Palace opens its mountain gate, we could not recruit enough disciples. If this is a vicious cycle, it would be detrimental to the future of the Great Luo. For a middle-ranking empire, if there was a shortage of talent and they could not produce enough blood, the consequences would be severe. Once the previous generation of elite warriors had died, the people behind them would not be able to catch up. The strength of the entire empire would drop severely. At that time, the fate that awaited this empire would most likely be collapse. The rise and fall of this empire followed a path. Apparently, this path was closely related to the number of talents and the strength of the blood. Inwardly, the martial saint was shocked when he heard Emissary Lu's words. Yet, he did not dare to comment. On the other hand, Qin Wushuang did not care much about these things. He cared more about his own martial arts training. As for the overall level of the Great Luo Empire, it would not affect him much. Thus, Marquis Wushuang, after the 5 palace masters saw your exam results, they all developed a strong interest. And this time, you had killed the head disciple of Old Man Jiyin. For sure, the 5 palace masters' love for talent would spread even more. This envoy dares to bet that when you go this time, the 5 Great Hall Masters will definitely fight until their faces and ears turn red from fighting over this disciple of yours. When he said here, Emissary Lu remembered how the Palace Masters usually fought for disciples and could not help but laugh. The martial saint sighed. Marquis Wushuang, you will have a meteoric rise when you go to the Stargaze Palace. From now on, those martial arts students from the Bayou will be left far behind you. Emissary Lu laughed. Senior Brother Chio, the Bayou will not be mistreated. If Marquis Wushuang receives the favor of the 5 palace masters, for sure, the Bayou will become an upper subordinate country, without a doubt. The martial saint was overjoyed. Since Emissary Lu had said it, it meant that he had a plan. For most of his life, the martial saint had worked hard for the Bayou to protect the country and raise the status of the Bayou. Now, finally, the Bayou had the hope to become an upper subordinate country. From now on, they would suppress the other surrounding subordinate countries. They would no longer have to look at their faces and fear their ambitions. For the Bayou to become an upper subordinate country, it would not only be the honor of the country. For sure, he would also receive the corresponding rewards. However, regardless of the content of these rewards, he would not be mistreated. Once the mother country gave out rewards, the richness of the rewards would be incomparable to a subordinate country like the Bayou. After making sure that Old Man Jiyin had left, Qin Wushuang and Emissary Lu stepped on the road to the Great Luo Empire. The martial saint returned to the martial saint mountain. The 3 months were almost up and the second round of the martial arts student exam was about to arrive. He must go back and prepare for the journey to the Great Luo Empire. As for Qin Wushuang, since he had killed Li Wuji, the second round of the martial arts student exam would have nothing to do with him. The purpose of the martial arts student exam was to select upper sky seedlings. Since he had entered the upper sky realm, it would be overkill if he participated in the second round of the exam. As the saying goes, why use a butcher's knife to kill a chicken? For this trip to the great Luo Empire, it would take about 7 days with their speed and strength as initial stage martial artists. In these 7 days, Emissary Lu had received 2 letters along the way. The first one said that the 5 palace masters were furious when they heard that the old man Jiyin was looking for trouble with Qin Wushuang. The second palace master had already volunteered to come to the Bayou country. The second letter told Emissary Lu that the head palace master had already sent people to the Jiyin mountain to monitor each and every movement of the Jiyin sect. With these 2 letters, the haze in Qin Wushuang's heart had swept away slightly. However, he knew better than anyone that the grudge between him and the old man Jiyin could not be reconciled. Regardless of him killing Li Wuji or the old man Jiyin killing his subordinates, they could not forgive each other. Even if the grudge was temporarily suppressed by external forces, it would erupt one day. Inwardly, Qin Wushuang vowed that he would train hard when he went to the Stargaze Palace. He would strive to reduce the gap between him and the old man Jiyin until he surpassed him. 1 hour later, there's one more update. It's the 4th update. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please log on to www.chijian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 143. As soon as these 2 entered the great Luo Empire, they met the second palace master who had rushed over. Emissary Lu hurriedly led Qin Wushuang forward to greet him. The second palace master had white hair and a calm personality. He was the famous representative of the calm faction in the Stargaze Palace. However, this time, he was different from his usual self and argued with the other palace masters until his face turned red. Finally, he had won the priority to go personally. He only had one goal, and that was to see the talent of this martial arts student champion from the Bayou country. Marquis Wushuang. This is the second palace master of the Stargaze Palace. Emissary Lu introduced him respectfully. Qin Wushuang had a good first impression of this second palace master when he saw him. Judging from his appearance, he was just an ordinary old man. However, if he looked into the eyes of that second palace master, he could see a sense of unfathomable depth. It was a type of deep abyss that made all his probing skills disappear. Elite warrior. This was a true elite warrior. One could imagine how many levels higher he was than an elite warrior that you could not even detect. The surname of the second palace master was Tan Zhongqi. However, for hundreds of years, almost no one in the great Luo Empire dared to call out the name Tan Zhongqi. Regardless of whether they were familiar with him, they had to call him Second Palace Master or Palace Master Tan. Qin Wushuang went forward respectfully. "It is my honor to meet you, Second Palace Master." Tan Zhongqi sized him up for a moment. The more he looked, the more joyful his expression became. If it were the humorous Fifth Palace Master, most likely, he would have already stepped on him. Good. Tan Zhongqi laughed. Qin Wushuang, this name is also good. Emissary Lu, this Qin Wushuang, do you think he deserves the title of National Scholar? Emissary Lu understood the meaning behind his words. He knew that the second palace master loved talent. How could he dare to not follow his tone? He smiled apologetically. Of course, a young man who could behead Li Wuji deserves the title. Tan Zhongqi clapped his hands and laughed. Nice. Qin Wushuang, I must admit that in 20 years, you are the only martial arts student that made me want to take you as my disciple. Let this old man ask you, are you willing to follow this old man in cultivation? Qin Wushuang had never thought of becoming a disciple, so he couldn't help hesitating when he heard Tan Zhongqi's question. Qin Wushuang was a free-spirited person who liked to be unrestrained. There was nothing wrong with acknowledging a master, but there was a hierarchy in learning the Tao, and the more accomplished one was the master. This second palace master's strength was many levels higher than his, so there was no harm in taking him as his master. The problem was that he didn't want to lose his freedom because of this. Emissary Liu was secretly shocked. He realized that Qin Wushuang was showing signs of unwillingness, so he could not help but remind him. Marquis Wushuang, the second palace master, is the pinnacle figure of the great Luo Empire. Many people yearn for a day and night, from young to old, from life to death, but they could not realize it. Tan Zhongqi did not rush him. He only smiled and observed Qin Wushuang. To be honest, if Qin Wushuang immediately kowtowed to him upon hearing his summons, he would be even more displeased. A young man should have the ambition of a young man. At least, Qin Wushuang's hesitation meant that this young man had his own ideas. For sure, he had his own plans on the path of training. Or else, he would not have hesitated at this moment. On the path of training, one would not be afraid of having a personality, but one would be afraid of not having any ideas. At Tan Zhongqi's level of cultivation, his comprehension and perception of this was too deep. In the end, many young men who followed the rules could not go further on the path of training. There was only one reason. They followed the rules too much, had no personality, and lacked variables. How about it? Young man, no need to answer me in a rush. Tan Zhongqi did not pressure him. Instead, he said with a smile, I can give you time to think about it. Besides, if you have any concerns or requests, you can tell me. I am not afraid of any problems. I am only afraid of you being a yes man. These words gave Qin Wushuang a good impression. Initially, he thought that when one had reached the level of the Stargaze Palace Master, each of them would be extremely arrogant and put on airs. Unexpectedly, this second Palace Master was not like that at all. On the contrary, he was extremely friendly. The intimacy he gave him had even surpassed the first time he had met the Martial Saint at the Martial Saint Mountain. At that time, the Martial Saint had more or less put on some airs, and this second Palace Master of the Stargaze Palace was acting this amiable. Qin Wushuang had never expected this. Second Palace Master, if I say no directly, for sure, it would be unappreciative of your kindness. In fact, when I saw you, I could already feel that you are unfathomable. Only, on the path of training, I have always valued freedom. If I had a teacher to restrict me, I am afraid that on the path of training, I would not be able to rush forward without any restrictions. Feeling helpless, Qin Wushuang could only speak the truth. Emissary Liu turned pale with fright when he heard his words. He kept shooting glances at Qin Wushuang. In his opinion, Qin Wushuang was being too arrogant when he said these words. He even did not know how to appreciate favors. Unexpectedly, Tan Zhongqi, the second palace master, revealed a thoughtful expression. He looked at Qin Wushuang with a slight surprise. He did not expect that at such a young age, this young man would have such strong willpower. Such rare persistence had allowed him to resist the temptation of the second palace master. For your information, what did it mean to become a disciple of the Stargaze Palace Master? It meant that he would have a meteoric rise in the great Luo Empire. He could do whatever he wanted, and no one would dare to question him. To a disciple from a subordinate country, this should be a great temptation. However, this Qin Wushuang was able to resist the temptation. And from his expression and eyes, this Qin Wushuang was not retreating for the sake of advancing. Instead, he was speaking from the bottom of his heart. The most novel thing was that although his theory was exaggerated and unorthodox, it was in line with the mentality of an elite warrior. It seems that this kid's success was not due to luck. Regardless of strength or mentality, he has something that other people of his age cannot compare to. When Tan Zhongqi thought here, his love for talent increased even more. In his life, he rarely gave in and made exceptions. However, today, he felt that he must make an exception. Instantly, he laughed and said, I already understand all of your considerations. Freedom and freedom, great. I will promise you if you become my disciple. The freedom you want, I can give it all to you. In the Stargaze Palace, in the great Luo Empire, you don't need to go to the palace, and you don't need to call the roll. You don't need to attend any group activities unless it's a major event. And you can choose from any cave, any library in the Stargaze Palace. You can come and go as you wish. Overall, you will practice how you did in the past. You and I will be master and disciple. I will teach you, and you will inherit my legacy. How about it?" When emissary Lu heard these words, he was dumbstruck and could not speak for a while. He even felt somewhat jealous. Such treatment was something that even the palace envoys did not dare to think about. How was this taking in a disciple? It was raising a calf. Among the 5 palace masters, the second palace master, who had always been the most serious, had such an open side, such an understanding side. He was willing to make an exception for a young man. When emissary Lu thought here, he felt relieved. Indeed, Marquis Wushuang had the capital. At the age of 17 or 18, he had entered the upper sky realm and killed a fierce upper sky warrior like Li Wuji. This achievement already made him feel ashamed of his own inferiority. Besides, Marquis Wushuang's achievements were not within the great Luo Empire, but in the subordinate countries where the spiritual qi was relatively weak and spiritual objects were scarce. This was even more impressive. Marquis Wushuang, what are you hesitating for? Is the second palace master making an exception? In the Stargaze Palace, you are the first one to receive such favor from the second palace master. Emissary Lu wanted to fulfill his wish and to build a good relationship with Qin Wushuang. He knew that if Qin Wushuang became a disciple of the second palace master, for sure, he would inherit the legacy of the second palace master. And if he had exceptional talent and had great achievements in the future, he would even be qualified to compete for the position of the next head palace master and rule the Stargaze Palace. To such a star of hope, a future candidate for the palace master, emissary Lu would never let go of the opportunity to make friends with him. To put it bluntly, these emissaries were the butlers of the Stargaze Palace. Although they had great power and held high positions, they would not be qualified to inherit the position of the palace master. Emissaries were emissaries. It was equivalent to taking care of the internal affairs and foreign affairs for the palace masters. They were not much different than the butlers. Only, they were in charge of a larger household. And the disciples of the palace masters, especially those who were qualified to inherit the legacy, were the true candidates for the position of palace master. They would be the future rulers and controllers of the Stargaze Palace. Tan Zhongqi laughed as he waited for Qin Wushuang's reaction. After receiving such promise, Qin Wushuang thought for a moment and knew that the best choice was to become the disciple of this second palace master. Since the second palace master had made these promises, he would not interfere with his freedom and would not force him to do the roll call. Indeed, it would not affect his training. It was equivalent to gaining a great teacher to guide him and a great support. No one would be able to refuse such a thing. Of course, Qin Wushuang would not be pretentious enough to refuse. Immediately, he performed the ritual of becoming his disciple with respect. After the ritual, the second palace master was even happier than Qin Wushuang as he laughed. Good, Wushuang. Although you are only acknowledging me verbally, later on, I will hold a grand ceremony for you. I will also let the other disciples of the Stargaze Palace know about you. It will prevent him from getting bullied by those old foxes when he goes in and out of the palace. Emissary Lu could not help but laugh. He had often heard that the second palace master was protective of his disciples. He did not expect him to be so protective. He had just taken in a disciple, and he was already thinking so far ahead. On the other hand, Qin Wushuang was indifferent. It was secondary whether the ceremony was grand or not. On the contrary, he did not like to be too ostentatious. The so-called, the wind will destroy the tree that stands out in the forest. As a disciple who had just entered the palace, if he received too much attention, it would cause others to feel unbalanced. It would cause more disputes. When it came to training, the worst thing was endless disputes. They would fight and scheme against each other and neglect their martial arts training. Just when he was about to speak, suddenly, the second palace master mumbled to himself, "I heard that old man Ji'in holds a grudge against your family. This time, he even went to the Bayou country to cause trouble for you. This old man Ji'in has some guts. He even dares to bully my disciple. Wushuang, let's go to the Ji'in mountain. I will make him understand that there are some people he cannot provoke. If he provokes them, he will be asking for his own humiliation." Emissary Liu felt pity for the old devil Jiyin. With the second palace master stepping out, most likely the old devil Jiyin would suffer greatly this time. It's time for the fourth watch, and I'm finally satisfied. Although it was late and he was tired, he would never break his promise. Haha, good night, brothers. These 2 days of blackout had caused Li Tion's writing plan to be passive, and he could not get any monthly votes. Today, he did not even get more than 10 votes. A single-digit monthly vote. To the current subscribers of this book, it was definitely a disgrace. Haha, Warriors of the Galaxy, do you still have any monthly votes? Bring them out. Everyone, bring out your treasures and smash the old devil Jiyin to death. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 144. Outside the Jiyin Mountain, a few spies from the Stargaze Palace have been monitoring the Jiyin Mountain for many days. When they received the second Palace Master's call, the closest spy came out from the dark. Greetings, second Palace Master, Emissary Liu. That spy said respectfully. No need for formalities. Are there any movements from the Jiyin sect? Second Palace Master, a few days ago, Old Man Jiyin had returned to the mountain in a hurry. For now, there are no major movements. I was worried that Old Man Jiyin would discover us. Thus, we did not get too close. As for what kind of shady business they are doing inside the Jiyin sect, I cannot find out. Tan Zhongqi waved his hand. No need to investigate, call everyone out. Follow me into the mountain. Monitoring the Jiyin sect was not a good job. Everyone knew that Old Man Jiyin had a violent personality. If they offended him, even the disciples of the Stargaze Palace would suffer. All 6 spies appeared. When they saw Qin Wushuang standing next to Tan Zhongqi, they were all curious. However, no one dared to ask. Tan Zhongqi said, "This is my new direct disciple, Qin Wushuang. Nice to meet you all." Qin Wushuang also knew the etiquette as he said generously, "Haha, junior brother Wushuang. No need to be so courteous." With the personal guidance of the second Palace Master, junior brother Wushuang's future is limitless. As his senior brother, we will not be able to catch up. Tan Zhongqi did not hold back as he chuckled and made a hand gesture. Then a group of people directly charged into the cordon of the Jiyin Mountain Gate. Being an experienced person, of course, Tan Zhongqi knew the location of the cordon. However, within the great Luo Empire, there was no place he did not dare to go. Of course, a mere Jiyin Mountain would not be a problem. "Who are you? Please stop." "Stop! This is the private land of the Jiyin sect. Trespassers die." A group of disciples of the Jiyin sect kept rushing out from the dark. However, these disciples were all pre-Sky Realm martial artists. Although each of them were at stage 8 or 9 of the genuine force, in Tan Zhongqi's eyes, they were no different than ants. "Die." Tan Zhongqi's face sank when he heard this word. Then he asked, "Wushuang, how many people did Old Man Jiyin kill when he went to your Eastwood town?" Qin Wushuang said, "No less than 100 people." "Who are they?" "Most of them were servants of the Qin family, and some of them are merchants." When Qin Wushuang mentioned this matter, he felt anger in his heart. Tan Zhongqi nodded his head. "All right, I'm not a gentleman if I don't take revenge. You can't let this matter become a knot in your heart and affect your cultivation. How about this? On our trip to the extreme Een Mountain today, kill everyone you see, until you think it's enough." The Jiyin sect had at least a few hundred disciples. It's more than enough to exchange for 100 lives. When the second Palace Master said this, his tone was calm, as if slaughtering the people of extreme Een sect was an extremely insignificant matter to him. It was as normal as eating and sleeping. However, Qin Wushuang didn't make a move. He said, "Master, I killed the people of extreme Een sect today. Old Freak Extreme, Een will definitely think that I'm using Master's name to intimidate others. I will come back to the Jiyin sect. When my strength has caught up to that Old Freak Extreme Een, I will go find him personally. For today's matter, you can make the decision." Emissary Liu and those 6 spies all looked at Qin Wushuang with admiration. Initially, they thought that Qin Wushuang was lucky to be able to become the disciple of the second palace master. Now, it seemed that he did not plan to use the name of the second palace master to show off. If it were a narrow-minded person, they would have started a massacre if they had such an opportunity. Why would they be polite? With the support of the second palace master, even if he slaughtered the entire Jin sect, Old Man Jin would not dare to make a sound. If he made a single noise, it would be as easy as lifting a finger for the second palace master to kill Old Man Jin. Tan Zhongxi also did not expect that his new disciple would have such a personality. Although he did not show anything on the surface, inwardly, he was overjoyed. Qin Wushuang's choice raised Tan Zhongxi's evaluation of him to another level. However, even though Qin Wushuang did not make a move, it did not mean that Tan Zhongxi would leave the matter at that. With a cold smile, he looked at the disciples of extreme Yin sect that were rushing out from all directions. 7 directions, a total of 21 people. Since he had already made a trip here, if he did not make a move and kill a few people, how could he intimidate a fierce character like Old Man Jin? His eyes swept around and narrowed into a line. Suddenly, he said indifferently, 21 people. Very good. I'll use you guys to establish my power. Before his voice had died away, his arm had not even been raised. It was almost impossible to see how he made a move. They only saw a blur in front of their eyes. The second palace master's finger had already pointed in a circle. This circle formed a semicircle. In the next moment, swish, swish, swish. 21 consecutive crisp sounds of explosions rang out. Those 21 people were like 21 pieces of wood that were all hit. With a loud bang, they exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Tan Zhongxi's attack seemed to be neither real nor real. Even Qin Wushuang could not describe his speed at all. This was because even with his eyesight, he could not see how the second palace master made a move at all. It seemed that the second palace master only moved his arm slightly. However, with just this slight movement, his fingertips had already attacked 21 times in a row. This kind of speed could no longer be described with the words shocking. Seeing this situation, Emissary Liu and the group of spies looked at each other in dismay and admiration. They also did not see how the second palace master made a move. The second palace master has shown his invincible power. I admire you. Emissary Liu praised sincerely. Haha, it's just a warm-up. Let's continue forward. Whoever tries to stop us will end up like this. Tan Zhongxi's tone was extremely domineering. His every movement was filled with the majesty of a palace master. Indeed, along the way, more and more sentries jumped out. They all had the same ending and were turned into ashes by the second palace master. Currently, Old Man Jin was thinking about how to escape from the great Luo Empire and how to destroy the Qin to avenge Li Wuji. Suddenly, 6 of his trusted disciples arrived from outside the door. Teacher, there are powerful intruders. The sentries along the way are being pulled out. They are almost at the intersect of the Ji-In sect. Old Man Ji-In opened his eyes widely. Intruders? Although this Ji-In mountain was not a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, in the past 100 years, no one had dared to act so presumptuously and kill their way to their door. Who had eaten the guts of a leopard? Old Man Jin was not a kind person who would swallow the loss of his teeth and blood. On the contrary, he had always been a person who would not allow himself to be at a disadvantage. Under normal circumstances, if he did not provoke others, they would be burning incense. Now, someone had come to provoke him. With Old Man Ji Yin's personality and his recent bad mood, the result could be imagined. He sneered and mumbled to himself, "Let's go and see which bastard has no eyes. I will make him regret coming to this world." His figure flashed, and a white light rolled out, directly flying out of the cave. Behind him, there were 6 Xiantian disciples. 7 figures flew up and landed, blocking the only way to the intersect of the Jin sect. Tan Zhongxi's cultivation was much higher than Old Man Ji Yin's. Naturally, he could sense Old Man Ji Yin's anger as he rushed out of the cave. He smiled and said, "Old Monster Ji Yin is here. A good show is coming." Immediately, he did not hold back and dashed forward in big strides. It seemed that his strides were not big and the frequency was not fast enough. However, with this jump and landing, he was already 300 to 400 feet away. Qin Wushuang and emissary Lu used all their strength, but could only barely follow behind. Old Man Ji Yin's face was filled with killing intent. He stood at the highest point of the pass and unscrupulously activated his powerful aura. His voice was transmitted far away. "Who are you? How dare you come on my Ji Yin mountain to make trouble?" When this sentence was transmitted, it was like thunder, shaking the heaven and earth. It rumbled as if 10,000 horses were galloping and war drums were beating together. If one's cultivation was slightly weaker, their qi and blood would be in turmoil after being hit by this sound wave. Tan Zhongqi knew that old monster Ji Yin was trying to show off. However, old monster Ji Yin's cultivation was a big joke in his eyes. He did not reveal too much and only lightly snorted from his nose. The light snort that came out of his nose was like a sharp arrow that pierced through the clouds and mist, rushing forward with indomitable will. It directly broke through Old Man Ji Yin's sound wave barrier and easily pierced through it as if it was a piece of white paper. With a schwa sound, it arrived in front of Old Man Ji Yin. Old Man Ji Yin only felt a one sound. The qi and blood in his body were greatly shaken and his hands and feet felt numb. His originally ruthless and savage expression immediately changed and became deathly pale. He looked ahead in shock and his heart started to tremble. Once an expert made a move, one would know whether or not he was skilled. The other party's light snort clearly showed that he did not use his full strength. Moreover, it seemed to be a casual move. However, the effect was enough to completely suppress the sound wave attack that he had been planning. This difference in strength made even a conceited old man like old monster Ji Yin feel somewhat surprised. His heart was beating like a drum. He knew that an expert had arrived. The 6 of you, pay attention. If this person is determined to cause trouble, when I fight with him, you must escape at all costs. Remember, split up and escape. Do not go in the same direction. Old Man Ji Yin cautiously instructed. The situation was more important than the person. No matter how conceited he was, he did not dare to be conceited in front of an expert who was stronger than him. Instead, he planned his escape route with a clear mind. In the world of experts, there would always be a higher mountain. If one did not know when to advance or retreat in front of an expert, one would only be courting death. There was no room for redemption. Blood, qi, and righteousness were completely useless in the face of absolute strength. Master, is the enemy very hard? Old monster Ji Yin's expression was dark. The muscles on his face twitched as he said coldly, "Very hard. Remember, split up and escape. Escape as many as you can. Do not think about hiding or revenge. Immediately escape to the Heavenly Lake Empire. Unless your strength increases greatly in the future, you must not return to the Great Luo Empire." Master, although old monster Ji Yin's character was bad, his disciples were all loyal and devoted. Obviously, they were not willing to abandon their master. Stop talking nonsense. Act according to the situation. Once you see that the situation is not good, escape immediately. You're not allowed to hesitate. Yes. At this moment, an indifferent voice sounded. Ji Yin, come out and see me. When old man Ji Yin heard this voice, his heart trembled. How could it be him? Today, there are still 4 chapters. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 145. Apparently, Old Man Ji Yin had recognized that the visitor was Tan Zhongqi, the second palace master of the Stargaze Palace. Within the vast Great Luo Empire, they were going to select the 3 most powerful people. For sure, this Tan Zhongqi would be among them. The identity of the second palace master of the Stargaze Palace was enough for him to do whatever he wanted in the Great Luo Empire. Since he had barged into the Ji Yin Mountain, of course, there was no need for him to hold back. Inwardly, Old man Ji-in felt nervous. Why had the palace master of the Stargaze Palace come here? I have made a lot of enemies in my life, yet I still treated the Stargaze Palace with respect. Why had the second palace master come to kill my disciples? Instantly, he gave a clear whistle and said loudly, "Are you Mr. Tan, the second palace master of the Stargaze Palace? I did not greet you from afar. Sorry for not greeting you." Although he spoke politely, inwardly, he was tense and did not dare to show the slightest carelessness. With the strength of this second palace master, if he truly wanted to slaughter the Jiin sect, most likely he could destroy the entire sect by himself. Thus, he must deal with him carefully. Ji-in, stop with the nonsense, Tan Zhongqi said with a tyrannical tone. In a flash, he had already jumped up the mountain pass and looked at Ji-in and his disciples with an overbearing attitude. His eyes were full of disdain and carried a form of disdain. If it were anyone else, most likely they would have gone to the underworld to report to the underworld if they looked at old devil Ji-in with such eyes. However, this Tan Zhongqi, the second palace master, was completely qualified. His gaze was not aggressive at all, but none of the 6 disciples of extreme darkness dared to go up to him. Under Tan Zhongqi's gaze, all of their gazes wandered. Some looked at their feet, some looked away, and some avoided his gaze. It was obvious that they were unable to resist the imposing manner of Tan Zhongqi's every move. Ji-in's heart tightened as he stepped forward and bowed. "Mr. Tan has come to the Ji-in mountain. Is there anything I can help you with?" Before the Stargaze Palace Master, regardless of his strength, old man Ji-in had to lower his head. There is the so-called saying, where the fist was hard, the reason was hard. If the fist was not as strong as the person, the reason would become unreasonable. Among the 7 upper sky disciples, Li Wuji is dead. The remaining 6 are all here, good? Not a single one is missing. Tan Zhongqi said lightly. Ji-in's scalp went numb as he looked at Tan Zhongqi alertly. Mr. Tan Zhongqi was expressionless. Extreme darkness, if I were to make a move now, do you think any of the 7 of you will survive? Inwardly, old man Ji-in trembled as he took a step back unconsciously. Mr. Tan, the Ji-in sect has always been respectful to the Stargaze Palace. Each year, we have never embezzled or been late with our offerings. However, he did not know what he had done to warrant Lord Tan's personal attention. Is there a misunderstanding here? In his heart, he already knew that this matter had something to do with the Qin clan. Only, he had never expected that a martial arts student from a middle subordinate country would be able to make the Stargaze Palace master step out. Could it be that the son of the Qin family was really that popular? Tan Zhongqi shook his head. There is no misunderstanding. Ji-in, let me ask you, a few days ago, you went to the Bayou country to show off, right? Sure enough, it was because of this. Extreme In was a little perturbed, but she couldn't deny it. He said carefully, indeed, it happened. However, that Qin family from the Bayou country had killed my disciples. My trip was only to seek revenge. When I heard your palace emissary mediating the matter, I also restrained myself on that trip and never showed any disrespect. However, you're not wrong to have killed people, right? Tan Zhongqi said with an unfriendly tone. Yes. Feeling helpless, old devil Ji-in had to admit it. Then you would not mind if I killed some of your disciples, right? I would not dare. The Stargaze Palace is the ruler of the great Luo Empire and holds the power of life and death. No one can resist us when we kill anyone. Even if I am bold, I would not dare to object. Ji-in answered with a humiliated tone. If I were to kill you today, it would show that the Stargaze Palace has no tolerance for anyone. Tan Zhongqi said lightly, Ji-in, I know your personality. This time, you came back from the Bayou country, and for sure, you plan to cut off all means of retreat. You can't hide this little scheme from me. Inwardly, Ji-in was shocked and revealed a horrified expression. Indeed, he had returned this time to make arrangements for his 6 disciples. After he had arranged his escape route, he was prepared to cut off all means of retreat and destroy the Qin family. Then, he would escape to another country. Mr. Tan, you must be joking. I, Ji-in, had established the Ji-in sect by myself, and I value this branch of the sect greatly. I do hope these are your heartfelt words. After all, with your strength, you are one of the elite warriors in the great Luo Empire. This is also the reason why I did not kill you today. The pressure in Old Man Ji Yin's heart was slightly relieved. Finally, he had heard some important points. It seemed that this second palace master did not plan to destroy his entire sect today. Mr. Tan, I'm deeply grateful for your kindness. Tan Zhongqi waved his hand impatiently. No need to speak such courteous words. Although I did not kill you today, it does not mean I will not kill you in the future. I'm only here to tell you that if you cherish your own strength and the foundation you have built, then, regardless of how many of your disciples the Qin family had killed, you should never seek revenge. Or else, you can give it your all and fight with everything you have. I promise that before your disciples leave the great Luo Empire, the Stargaze Palace will not leave any of you alive. If even one of you escapes from the great Luo Empire, the Stargaze Palace will be useless. The threat was not an empty threat. Inwardly, Ji Yin cried out bitterly. He knew that since the second palace master had spoken these words, for sure, he had predicted his intention to take the risk. Regardless of whether he denied it or not, for sure, the other party would pay attention to his move. This way, for sure, there would be countless scouts from the Stargaze Palace patrolling around the mountain gate of the Ji Yin sect. As long as the Ji Yin sect made the slightest movement, most likely, the Stargaze Palace's judgment would follow. What awaited the Ji Yin sect would be total annihilation. A cruel choice was placed before Old Devil Ji Yin. He would either compromise or take the risk. Taking a deep breath, Old Man Ji Yin already had a plan. Although the Stargaze Palace is strong, can you keep monitoring my Ji Yin sect forever? I will lower my head for now. I do not believe that the Stargaze Palace will keep watching my Ji Yin sect. Humph! As long as I can find a trace of opportunity. When he thought here, Old Man Ji Yin already had a plan inwardly. However, he still pretended to ask, Second Palace Master, I have a question that I dare not ask. What is the relationship between that Qin family from the Bayou and the Stargaze Palace? Tan Zhongqi said coldly, Qin Wushuang, an offspring of the Qin family, is already my direct disciple. Is this reason enough for you to take a step back? The expression on Old Man Ji Yin's face changed as his chest moved up and down. After a while, he said sadly, I understand. The Ji Yin sect admits defeat. When he said these words, Ji Yin felt extremely unreconciled. He was extremely angry and unwilling. However, he had no choice. Before the power of the Stargaze Palace, even if he did not want to compromise inwardly, he had to admit defeat verbally. Or else, with Tan Zhongqi's methods, he could have destroyed the Ji Yin sect today. Tan Zhongqi glanced at Ji Yin's disciples with an unfriendly gaze. Suddenly, he laughed. Ji Yin, to show your sincerity, let your second and third disciple accompany me to the Stargaze Palace. In 10 years, if the Ji Yin sect is obedient, I will let them go. Instantly, the last line of defense in Old Man Ji Yin's heart collapsed. Tan Zhongqi's move to remove the firewood from under the cauldron had completely destroyed any hope he had. However, he could not resist. Once he resisted, it would mean the end of the Ji Yin sect. Wuxia, Wujiu, go with the palace master. It's good to see the world at the Stargaze Palace. Old Man Ji Yin instructed meaningfully. The second and third disciples stepped out. Since it was their teacher's order, they would not dare to disobey. At the same time, they knew the heavy responsibility. It was equivalent to becoming a hostage at the Stargaze Palace. If they did not become this hostage, it would be the end of the world for the Ji Yin sect. Thus, they had no other choice. For the Ji Yin sect, and to repay their teacher. Teacher, please rest assured. When we go to the Stargaze Palace, we will play our part and strive to reunite with you as soon as possible. These two also expressed their stance with tears of blood. Although they did not dare to speak too boldly before Tan Zhongqi, the second palace master, their tone was clear. They were telling Old Man Ji Yin that they would never betray their teacher. Old man Jean waved his hand and revealed a bleak expression as if he had suddenly aged a few dozen years. Go, go. The mountain gate of the Ji'in sect will always be open to you. Naturally, Tanzhongqi disdained to expose their parting tricks. He made a circle in his hand, and two thin threads that were almost invisible to the naked eye came out and wrapped around the two of them from afar. With a tug, he lifted them up and captured them. Tanzhongqi laughed. Ji'in, that's it for today. Take care of yourself. After he had finished speaking, he kicked with both feet and jumped down from the mountain pass. In a flash, he disappeared from Ji Yin's line of sight. Old man Ji Yin's face was ashen, and he could not speak for a while. He Yu Qian, weren't you the one who had caused all the crimes? Today, if I don't skin you alive, how could I get rid of the hatred in my heart? Since old man Ji Yin had nowhere to vent his anger, naturally, he took it out on He Yu Qian. This time, he had lost completely. Not only did he lose the life of his head disciple, Li Wuji, he had also lost the life of his second and third disciple. Even if they did not die at the Stargaze Palace as hostages, it would be enough for them to suffer. 10 years, in other words, in these 10 years, old man Ji Yin could not play any tricks. Or else, it would be the same as giving up on the two hostages. Old man Ji Yin had high hopes for all 7 of his disciples. To give up any one of them would be as difficult as cutting his own flesh. Or else, he would not have gone to the Bayou country to seek revenge for Li Wuji. He had even given up the foundation of the Ji'in sect in the great Luo Empire to seek revenge. However, now, he had to hold back from shooting at the rat for fear of breaking the vases. Regardless of how many tricks he had up his sleeve, he could only watch his enemy live freely. To an old devil like old man Ji'in, who had only suffered for one night, one could imagine the degree of depression he felt from not being able to seek revenge. Tanzhongqi took away the 2 disciples of old man Ji'in and arrived outside in a moment like the wind. Qin Wushuang and emissary Liu had been waiting for a long time. Wushuang, emissary Liu, do you guys have any questions as to why I did not start a massacre today and slaughter the entire Jin sect? Qin Wushuang did not find it strange. On the other hand, emissary Liu, who was familiar with the style of the second palace master, was somewhat confused. With the second palace master's thunderous methods, it was strange that he did not eliminate the root of the problem. There are 2 more chapters, the 3rd chapter at 21, the 4th chapter at 22. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.qijian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 146. Qin Wushuang was calm. He knew that each person had their own reasons for doing things. And for someone like his teacher, for sure, each of his actions had a deeper meaning. From the bottom of his heart, he really did not want his teacher to kill Old Devil Ji'in. Old Devil Ji'in was a person that Qin Wushuang hated from the bottom of his soul after he had entered the upper sky realm. He had killed the innocent and used vicious methods. That massacre at Eastwood Town had already made Qin Wushuang set a goal. He must kill Old Devil Ji'in with his own hands to comfort those souls. However, emissary Liu said in a low voice, Second Palace Master, that Old Devil Ji'in has a persevering personality. For sure, he did not compromise today because he had truly lost. Instead, he feared your authority and had to compromise temporarily. Tanzhongqi said lightly, How could he hide his little tricks from me? Of course, I have my reasons for not killing him. Currently, on the surface, the great Luo still looks glorious. However, the true situation is somewhat complicated. In the past 100 years, the talents of the great Luo have gradually shown a terrifying situation where each generation is not as good as the previous one. This is a very dangerous signal. In the Tianxian land, the decline and fall of an empire usually starts with the loss of talents. Then, this gap will slowly become bigger. Once the other empires discover this gap, they will be attacked by external forces. Under the internal and external troubles, the situation will become even more unfavorable. Emissary Liu and Qin Wushuang were both stunned. Since the second palace master had told them about such confidential matters, naturally, he viewed them as his trusted aides. Nominally, the Great Luo is hosting this martial arts student exam. In fact, the Stargaze Palace is the one behind the royal family of the Great Luo. Even the Stargaze Palace has a problem recruiting younger disciples. You can imagine the situation of the other powerhouses in the Great Luo. The situation of the entire Great Luo goes without saying. Second Palace Master, the Stargaze Palace has tens of thousands of disciples. We also have advanced disciples and almost 100 core disciples. How could there be a shortage of talents? Emissary Lu was somewhat confused. The second Palace Master smiled bitterly. Anyways, let's end the discussion of this matter here. If we go any deeper, we will get into confidential matters. Overall, the strength of a sect does not depend on the number of people. What's more important is one's potential, especially the potential to become a high-end expert. Emissary Lu nodded thoughtfully. He had experienced this before. In the construction of a sect, most of the disciples were only there to serve as a facade. In the end, the ones who would decide the fate of the sect were still the top few talents. Whether or not they could support the sect's future depended on the few core figures at the top. Sometimes, when a super expert appeared in a sect, he could even directly overpower the sect that was originally stronger than him. Think about it. With the appearance of an elite warrior at the perfect stage, regardless of the number of talents from the other sects, they would have to lower their heads before this absolute elite warrior. Once a perfect stage makes a move, even if you have a bunch of upper sky disciples, they would still be cannon fodder. Since they were all at the perfect stage, even if 100 initial stage warriors went up together, it would still be useless. Unless they scattered and fled, it would be difficult for them to escape the fate of being killed. Therefore, Tan Zhongqi's words were spoken from the bottom of his heart. Emissary Lu nodded and continued. If that's the case, second palace master letting old monster Jean go was also considering the overall situation of the Great Luo Empire. That's right. Although old monster Jean is vicious and treacherous. However, with his strength, he is still a talent in the Great Luo Empire. For such a person, it would be a pity to kill him. Most importantly, if I had killed the Jean sect myself, it would cause the other powerhouses in the Great Luo Empire to feel uneasy. It would affect the stability of the entire Great Luo Empire. To kill or not to kill, there's a lot to learn. Unless that old monster Jean had asked for death, I did not plan to kill him today. Suddenly, Emissary Lu said, that personal grudge between Marquis Wu Shuang and old monster Tan Zhongqi said, this is a story for later. I made a 10-year promise. In these 10 years, for sure, old monster Jean would not dare to move. And after 10 years, if Wu Shuang shows enough potential and strength, then he would have the right to speak in the Stargaze Palace. At that time, he would have the right to decide whether to kill Ji-in or not. Then, he said to Qin Wu Shuang, 10 years, this is my expectation for you. After 10 years, if you cannot surpass old monster Ji-in, I would be somewhat disappointed. Qin Wu Shuang immediately said, I will do my best. I would not dare to disappoint you. Good. You have ambition, a good man. Tan Zhongqi laughed. Let's not waste time. Let's head to the Stargaze Palace immediately and meet the other 4 palace masters. I will let them know that I did not come here in vain. I have taken in a good disciple, haha. Among the 5 palace masters, besides the head palace master who held a superior position, there was some competition between the other 4 palace masters, especially when they placed great importance on the development of their line. Often, there would be a situation where they would fight until their faces turned red with anger for a good seedling. This time, Tan Zhongqi also used his eloquence to defeat the other palace masters in a war of words, thus obtaining this opportunity. Fortunately, this trip was not in vain, or else it would be strange if the other palace masters did not laugh at him when he returned. The Stargaze Palace was located in the number 1 mountain range in the Great Luo Empire, the Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range. This Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range stretched for tens of thousands of miles. Although the spiritual chi was not abundant, it was a unique existence within the great Luo Empire. Because of this, it was able to nurture a major sect like the Stargaze Palace. It was able to support a middle-ranking empire like the Great Luo. Marquis Wushuang. The Stargaze Palace is divided into the main palace, front, back, left, and left palaces. Thus, there are 5 palace masters. Usually, the 5 palace masters oversee the 5 palaces. However, they would gather at the main palace when they encounter collective matters. Your teacher, the second palace master, is the head of the Green Cloud Palace. Emissary Lu explained patiently. It was apparent that he intended to befriend Qin Wushuang, the future favorite. Qin Wushuang did not act pretentious and listened carefully. Regardless, it would not be a bad thing to join such a major sect. Since he had joined, it was necessary for him to gain some basic understanding. Immediately, he listened with an open mind and received the teachings. He said politely, "Emissary Lu, the 3 words Marquis Wushuang is a title in the Bayou country. I am afraid it would not be appropriate to bring it to the Stargaze Palace. If you do not mind, you can call me Junior Brother Wushuang or Junior Brother Qin. I will call you Senior Brother Lu. How about it?" Naturally, they would become much closer by addressing each other as Senior Brother. Of course, Emissary Lu could not ask for more as he left. "Since Junior Brother Wushuang says so, then I will call myself Senior Brother." "How can you say I'm calling myself Senior Brother? You don't have to be so polite. In the future, I will need your guidance if I have many questions." "Haha, of course. Of course, I will do my best to solve your problems. By the way, Junior Brother Wushuang, I will tell you more about the situation in the Stargaze Palace. Besides the 5 palaces, among the tens of thousands of disciples in the Stargaze Palace, only the advanced disciples have the opportunity to train in the virtuous Cloud Mountain Range. And only the core disciples are qualified to enter the virtuous Cloud Mountain Range. The other disciples who are not advanced disciples can only train in the other branches of the virtuous Cloud Mountain Range. The treatment here is completely different. Such classification is to stimulate the disciples from all branches to become more motivated. It doesn't matter for the lower disciples. As long as you work hard, you will have a chance to be promoted during the annual exam. Similarly, it's not a problem if you want to be promoted to the core as long as you show your strength during the year-end exam. Similarly, if the core disciples do not work hard and do not perform well, they will also be demoted. Do you understand such a promotion system? He cannot understand it. After all, the core of it was survival of the fittest. Since Senior Brother Lu has explained it so clearly, I would be a blockhead if I still don't understand. May I ask, how does this promotion system work? Emissary Lu said with a smile. In fact, it's simple. It's only the last place elimination system. It's only a matter of the number of spots. For example, for the core disciples, each year there are only 3 to 5 spots. If you rank last in the exam, then naturally you will be demoted. If the advanced disciples want to become the core disciples, they will be promoted automatically if they rank in the top 3 or 5. As for the lower disciples to become the advanced disciples, there are more spots. There are a few dozen spots. There's a much higher chance. Qin Wushuang nodded as he had a general understanding. Suddenly, he asked with a smile, "Senior Brother, since you hold a superior position in the Stargaze Palace, you should have already become a core disciple, right?" "Yes, the 10 emissaries are all core disciples. And most of the disciples that the 5 palace masters are proud of are also core disciples. Some of the disciples of the Shakyamuni and elders are also core disciples. Anyways, there are less than 100 core disciples. However, Junior Brother Wushuang, with your exceptional talent, I believe that the second palace master will get you a spot as a core disciple." Just when Emissary Lu was introducing the Stargaze Palace to Qin Wushuang, the second palace master was engaged in a war of words with the other 4 palace masters. "Head palace master, please speak. I have taken in such a disciple with great difficulty. If you don't give him a spot as a core disciple, I will not do it." Tan Zhongqi, the second palace master, called out with a deep tone. Apparently, they had already gone through a round of argument. It was apparent that the head palace master had not expressed his opinion, and the other 3 palace masters were of the same mind and would not agree to make an exception. Regardless of who entered the Stargaze Palace, they must follow the rules. They would start from the lowest level. This was the Iron Rule, and there were few exceptions. While the head palace master remained silent, the other palace masters had already objected. Second palace master, this is your fault. The reason why the Stargaze Palace could become the #1 sect in the Great Luo Empire and the pillar of the empire was because of the Iron Rule. If you make an exception this time, then in the future, wouldn't it be a mess when everyone asks for a spot as a core disciple? How could it be a good thing for the Stargaze Palace to have an overflow of core disciples? The first one to object was the 5th Palace Master. Since the 2nd Palace Master had taken the initiative, how could he agree at this time? To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chijian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 147. As soon as the 5th Palace Master had spoken, the 3rd Palace Master also chimed in. 5th is right. 2nd Palace Master, it's not easy to set such a bad precedent. Once we do, it will become a mess. For sure, a crack will appear in the internal harmony of the 5 Palace Masters. They did not mean to make things difficult for the 2nd Palace Master. Indeed, they did not want to set this precedent. At the same time, they did not want the 2nd Palace Master to get a core spot so easily. For your information, there were only 96 core spots in the Stargaze Palace. The 5 Palace Masters had divided 64 spots. Among them, the head Palace Master had gotten 16 spots. The other 4 Palace Masters all had 12 spots. The remaining 33 spots belonged to the 8 Shakyamuni and 16 elders. Each of the 8 Shakyamuni took 2 spots, and the 16 elders took 1 each. 96 spots, not one more, not one less. If one more spot was added, it would be the same as adding a spot out of thin air. It would benefit the 2nd elder and break the original balance. This was something the other 3 Palace Masters did not want to see. Tan Zhongqi said unhappily, "My disciple is the overall winner of this exam." For this exam, all 5 Palace Masters have supported him, right? If that's the case, of course, he should be rewarded when the exam results come out. If we don't give the core spot to such a person, how could we encourage him? How would we organize the martial arts student exam in the future? The 4th Palace Master had always maintained a cold face, as he said coldly, "2nd Palace Master, it's already a great favor to give an advanced spot to an exam winner from a subordinate country. Giving him a core spot directly, are you not afraid of raising him too high and overpraising him to death?" Tan Zhongqi said, "Do you think I don't know my disciple better than you? If it were someone else, I would not be willing to promote him like this. However, this Qin Wushuang is different. He is young, shrewd, and calm. I'm not worried about overpraising him to death. Of course, you speak positively of your disciple. However, I do not believe that a seedling from a subordinate country would have much potential." The 4th Palace Master did not hide his doubts. "Haha, Lao Si, don't tell me that you're saying sour grapes because you can't eat them," Tan Zhongqi retorted. "2nd Palace Master, it seems that you are very confident in this new disciple." "That's for sure. A disciple from a subordinate country who is self-taught and able to kill someone like Li Wuji at the age of 17 or 18. If I don't have confidence in him, who else can I have confidence in?" Tan Zhongqi said with a smile. "Whether or not Li Wuji was killed by him, you didn't see it with your own eyes. Jealousy. He's obviously jealous." Tan Zhongqi only had one attitude towards these different opinions, and it was quite firm and rude. That was, he sneered at them. "All right, stop fighting, all of you. Second brother, frankly speaking, your request puts me in a difficult position. Directly becoming a core disciple. This precedent is extremely rare in the Stargaze Palace. In history, there were only 3 precedents, and in those 3 cases, they were promoted to the core directly because they had made special contributions to the Stargaze Palace. As for this Qin Wushuang, although he is the trial champion, we did not agree to directly give him a core disciple position. Thus, It's not appropriate to give him a core disciple position directly. I am afraid there will be a lot of disputes. Finally, the head palace master spoke. After Tan Zhongqi heard his words, he said angrily, "This way, this martial arts student exam is just a formality. Even the exam champion is not valued. You can imagine the rest." The head palace master knew that he was upset as he laughed. "Second, I know you are not convinced. The Stargaze Palace has always emphasized that everyone has the right to speak. How about this? We will gather the 8 Shakyamuni, 16 elders, and 10 palace emissaries. Everyone will vote by secret ballot. If more people support directly becoming a core disciple, then we will make an exception. If not, we will give Qin Wushuang the advanced disciple position. As long as he has the strength, there are only 4 months left until the end of the year exam. As long as he performs well in the exam, how difficult would it be for him to become a core disciple?" After he had finished speaking, he added, "The Stargaze Palace will never bury a talent. I'm only afraid that we don't have any talent. Sooner or later, gold will shine brightly, and not a pearl covered in dust." Tan Zhongqi knew that if they were to vote, most likely, not many people would agree. After all, the distribution of the core spots was not only a competition between the disciples. It also involved the balance of power among the heads. No one wanted to break this balance and benefit him alone. However, he would not be satisfied if they did not vote. He could only say, "Then let's vote and see what everyone thinks." He also knew that if everyone opposed and he insisted alone, it would be easy for him to isolate himself. Even Qin Wushuang, the newcomer, would be isolated. He could only take a step back and give himself a way out. Soon, the head palace master had given the order. The great star bell rang 3 times and invited all Shakyamuni, elders, and the 10 palace emissaries to the main palace for a meeting. Hearing the bell ring 3 times, that emissary Lu immediately said, "Junior brother Wushuang, the head palace master is gathering all the leaders of the Stargaze Palace for a meeting. I cannot stay here with you. For sure, someone will come to invite you." Qin Wushuang nodded. "Okay, please go ahead." Emissary Lu did not dare to hesitate as he rushed towards the main palace. In a moment, all the people had arrived. Hearing the head palace master's explanation, everyone understood what was going on. They all said, "Then let's vote without recording the names." When Tan Zhongqi saw the expression of these people, he knew that the result of this vote would not be ideal. Sure enough, the 5 hall masters, 8 law kings, 16 elders, and 10 emissaries, a total of 39 people, only had 8 votes in favor of him. Besides those Shakyamuni and elders who were close to Tan Zhongqi, the second palace master, most likely everyone else had voted against. Tan Zhongqi had nothing to say about this result. "Head palace master, since everyone has agreed, I have nothing else to say. However, we must honor those secular rewards, right?" Tan Zhongqi was protective of his people, and his performance was in all aspects. Although he did not get a spot for Qin Wushuang to become a core disciple, he must fight for something for Qin Wushuang's family in the secular world. That way, at least, it would allow him to focus more during training. The head palace master laughed. "Of course, I will take care of the royal family of the Great Luo and ask them to honor the rewards as soon as possible. When the Baiyu country becomes an upper subordinate country, Qin Wushuang's family will be bestowed the title of king. They will stand shoulder to shoulder with the emperor of the Baiyu country and will not need to pay respects to the court. Qin Wushuang will be bestowed the title of National Scholar of the Great Luo and will stand shoulder to shoulder with the emperor of the Great Luo. He will not need to pay respects. As for the other personal rewards, I will honor them when I see Qin Wushuang." As long as Qin Wushuang did not get the core disciple spot, the other palace masters would not have any reason to object to the other rewards. After all, everyone had supported this martial arts student exam. If they did not do anything, they would feel it would be unreasonable. Besides, to elite warriors at their level, those secular rewards were like floating clouds. They did not need to honor them. It could not even be counted as a favor. How could they object? Hearing the words of the head palace master, Tan Zhongqi's anger finally subsided. However, he still mumbled, it's only 4 months. At the end of the year exam, for sure, my disciple will surpass him. At that time, if any of you get squeezed out, don't repeat it." The head palace master laughed. "Second, since you have passed the end of the year exam, of course, you will become a core disciple. No one would dare to be long-winded." He laughed and said again, "Emissary Liu, go and bring that Qin Wushuang here. I believe everyone has been waiting for him for a long time. Honestly, I am also quite curious about the young man who could kill Li Wuji." Those Shakyamuni and elders did not know much about Qin Wushuang. Hearing the words of the head palace master, they all became interested and started to whisper to each other. Kill Li Wuji? Wasn't Li Wuji the head disciple of the old devil Jiyin? Among the younger generation of all the major sects in the great Luo Empire, Li Wuji was also a figure. Even in the Stargaze Palace, he would most likely become a core disciple. No wonder the second palace master cared so much about this disciple. Indeed, he had picked up a precious treasure. In a moment, Emissary Liu arrived with Qin Wushuang. Before Qin Wushuang had even approached the main palace, he could already feel the upper sky presence inside the main palace. It was rich and gloomy. If a pre-sky realm warrior were to come here, most likely he would not even have the strength to cross the threshold. His legs would have already become soft from the pressure of this upper sky presence. Qin Wushuang greets all the palace masters, Shakyamuni, elders, and emissaries. Qin Wushuang walked in large strides. He appeared calm and neither servile nor overbearing. He knew that since they were meeting for the first time today, for sure, someone would show him who was the boss. Regardless, he must not be intimidated by them. Since they were from the same sect, there was no need to be afraid. In terms of scenes, Qin Wushuang had experienced many big scenes in his former world. Although he had never met an elite warrior at this level, he did not feel any discomfort after suppressing his surging upper sky qi, since he had experienced many big scenes in his past life. After a moment of looking, the head palace master laughed. "Good. No wonder Second is so proud. Indeed, you are a good seedling. Qin Wushuang, from now on, you are a disciple of the Stargaze Palace. For those rules, your teacher has already blocked them for you. I'm not harsh on you. There are only 3 points that you must remember. Please instruct me, head palace master. First, you must not betray your teacher and kill your ancestors. Second, you must not kill your fellow disciples and be brave. Third, you must not collude with foreign countries and betray your country." For any of these 3 points, Qin Wushuang knew he could do it. This was not a restriction of rules and regulations, but a basic principle of being a human being. Of course, Qin Wushuang would not touch this bottom line. He answered seriously, "I will remember and never violate it." "Good." The head palace master nodded. "For this martial arts student exam, you are the overall champion of the great Luo Empire. Thus, you will receive all the rewards. The details are as follows." At this point, he was already very satisfied with the rewards of the secular world. Now, he was more concerned about what the Stargaze Palace would reward him personally. P.S. Fourth update. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chijian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 148. It was an honor for the Baiyu to become an upper subordinate country. Qin Wushuang did not feel much about it. However, it would be nice to help the martial saint of the Baiyu fulfill his wish. As for the Qin family, he had become a king on par with the emperor of the Baiyu. He did not have to pay his respects to the imperial court. It was only an honor and limited benefit. Personally, he had become a national scholar of the great Luo and held a much more respectable position. Even within the great Luo Empire, he was a supreme existence. When he went to the subordinate countries, he would hold an even more respectable position. In fact, it was to make things easier for Qin Wushuang. It would allow him to not get involved with the secular world wherever he went. Basically, all core disciples of the Stargaze Palace had this honor. Qin Wushuang expected that the Stargaze Palace would give him some material rewards. Indeed, the head palace master said, You are the overall winner of this martial arts exam. Of course, there will be personal rewards. However, it will not be much. As for the exact reason, the second palace master will explain it to you when he has time. Now you are already at the upper sky realm. You have 3 rewards to choose from. Innate offensive elementary spirit weapons, innate elementary spirit defensive armors, or other supplementary medicinal pellets. Among these 3, you can only choose one of them. This is the rule of the Stargaze Palace. Pills? Is there a golden body pill or an upper sky initial stage pill? Qin Wushuang was moved inwardly. The head palace master laughed and shook his head. The golden body pill is to help you break into the upper sky realm. It is an upgrade pill, not a supplementary pill. The supplementary pill is used to restore the spiritual qi, heal injuries, and save lives. The 2 are different in nature. In principle, the upgrade pill would not be used as a reward. It's because it is extremely rare. Only the supplementary pills would be used as a reward. When he heard this explanation, Qin Wushuang was somewhat disappointed. In fact, he needed the upgrade pill the most. If he could get a golden body pill as a reward, he would rather give up the other options. If the Qin clan could produce a Khanate expert, then he would be more at ease in his future path of cultivation and would have fewer worries. Since that's the case, I'll choose a defensive armor. Qin Wushuang thought for a moment. He had already obtained an innate grade offensive weapon from Li Wuji. Although he couldn't use it for the time being, at least he had one now. What he lacked now was a defensive tool. The Lord Hall Master nodded. All right, Shakyamuni Shunshan. One of the 8 protector kings walked out. Your subordinate is here. The head palace master said to Qin Wushuang. This Shakyamuni Shunshan is the head of the treasury in the Stargaze Palace. You will follow him to pick one. Yes, Qin Wushuang replied. Everyone, since Qin Wushuang has passed the second palace master's exam and become his disciple, then he does not need to participate in this second round of the martial arts student exam. Everyone must pay more attention in the following second exam of the martial arts student exam. Let's try to find a few good seedlings. Yes. Okay, that's it for today. You can leave now. After they had left, Tan Zhongqi took Qin Wushuang to the treasury to pick a defensive spiritual weapon. Since Qin Wushuang was only at the initial stage of the upper sky realm, the rewards given to him could only be of the same level. After some selection, he finally chose the gray cloud armor, as it had a comprehensive defensive power in all aspects. When they returned to the green cloud palace controlled by the second palace master, Tan Zhongqi laughed. Wushuang, today you have given me a lot of prestige. Nice. Each of those guys was waiting to see you make a fool out of yourself. Too bad. I made them jealous. Wushuang, earlier at the main palace, I had fought with them until my face turned red because of a core disciple spot. Unfortunately, those bastards did not agree as they were afraid that I would take advantage of them. However, it doesn't matter. You just have to bear with it for now and start as an advanced disciple. At the end of the year exam, you will show your talent and kick out those core disciples. You will enter the core disciple level openly. Let's see what else they can say at that time. On the other hand, Qin Wushuang was indifferent. In his opinion, although there was a difference between an advanced disciple and a core disciple, it would not matter. Even if he was an inferior disciple, he would still be a disciple of the Stargaze Palace. If he started too high, it would be disadvantageous to the public opinion. Starting as an advanced disciple would also prevent a lot of controversy. At that time, wouldn't it be more honorable to enter the core disciple level with his own strength? Even if he started too low, it would not be lower than when he had just been reborn. He was a humble class, and his family was on the verge of collapse. At that time, he was not pessimistic, and now he had no reason to be pessimistic. Teacher, I am quite open-minded about the core disciple status. When I was in the Bayou country, I knew that strength speaks for itself. When I just arrived, if I started as a core disciple, I am afraid other disciples would criticize me. At that time, I would use my own strength to squeeze into the core disciple level. No one would say anything. Yes, you have ambition. From you, I see a different temperament than other young people. You are not worldly, not pretentious, and always give yourself a clear position. Even when you entered the Stargaze Palace, you did not lose yourself. This is rare. Wushuang, in my line, there are more than 100 direct disciples. In total, there are more than 1,000 disciples. However, until now, I have not found a suitable disciple to inherit my legacy. From you, I see hope. In fact, it was no wonder that Zhongqi cared so much. Indeed, he admired Qin Wushuang and loved his talent. In the past, he had a lot of direct disciples, and 12 of them had entered the core disciple level. However, none of them made him feel at ease. Teacher, I am extremely grateful for your high expectations. I just don't know where your other disciples are. They're all cultivating with their heads down. Now, you are an advanced disciple. With your identity plate, you can directly enter the virtuous Cloud Mountain range to train. However, for now, you should not step into the virtuous Cloud Mountain. The Stargaze Palace has strict family rules, and you cannot provoke them. Teacher, could it be that there are differences between training places? Qin Wushuang asked curiously. There is a big difference, Zhongqi said slowly. In the virtuous Cloud Mountain range of the Stargaze Palace, besides the main virtuous Cloud Mountain range, there are 6 other branches. However, those branches only belong to the low-level disciples and outer sect disciples. The spiritual chi would be much thinner, and the chances of spiritual objects appearing would be much smaller. However, the main virtuous Cloud Mountain range is the place with the most abundant spiritual chi in the entire Great Luo Empire. Most importantly, generations of elite warriors in the Stargaze Palace have trained in the virtuous Cloud Mountain range. Thus, there are many fortuitous opportunities hidden in the main mountain range. For these fortuitous opportunities, if you intend to find them and dig them out, perhaps you would not find them even in 100 years. However, if the fortuitous opportunity arrives, you could find them by accident. This is the so-called fortuitous opportunity. However, one thing is for sure. If you train in a place with more abundant spiritual chi, your training speed and progress would be much faster. This is also the reason why I fought for a spot in the core for you. I see. Qin Wushuang nodded thoughtfully. Suddenly, he asked again. Earlier at the main palace, the head palace master said that you would tell me why the Stargaze Palace does not reward individuals generously. Haha, Wushuang. In fact, we have already talked about the entire problem. It's related to the situation of the entire Great Luo Empire. To put it bluntly, it's because of the lack of resources. It's not that the Stargaze Palace does not want to reward people, but they are somewhat embarrassed. Regardless of offensive spiritual weapons, defensive spiritual weapons, or spiritual pills, the Stargaze Palace only has one word to describe it: shortage. To make spiritual weapons, you must have the materials and a qualified and skilled blacksmith. Similarly, to make spiritual pills, you also need the materials, recipes, and an alchemist. Without any of these links, you will not be able to operate. Currently, in the Stargaze Palace, although we lack the materials, at least we can provide some. However, we need to nurture blacksmiths and alchemists. Without good seedlings, it's useless. If he had not heard his teacher talk about it, Qin Wushuang would not have imagined that the giant Stargaze Palace was struggling to make ends meet. In this upper sky world, resources were indeed limited. Being the supreme authority of the Great Luo Empire, if they were already in such a situation, then most likely those small sects would be in an even more difficult situation. No wonder that Li Wuji could not get a single dragon and tiger body sculpting pill, even though he had the recipe. Now, Qin Wushuang finally understood. Teacher, could it be that those empires around the Great Luo Empire have abundant resources? Zhongqi smiled bitterly. Abundant? How abundant could it be? Wushuang, if a country suddenly discovered abundant resources, then in less than 100 years, for sure, they would upgrade. For sure, they would stand out. The common situation in the human countries is the lack of resources. As he spoke, he shook his head helplessly and added, even the human countries could not step into the places with abundant resources. This is the Tianxian land. Oh, as soon as Qin Wushuang heard these words, his interest was piqued. Wushuang, these are all things for later. Currently, your main task is to train. For these things, you will understand it when it's time. However, since you are interested, I will reveal it to you. Tan Zhongqi's tone was full of deep meaning. In the Tianxian land, the 3 upper-ranking empires and the 9 middle-ranking empires, to put it bluntly, are not the true rulers of the Tianxian land. In fact, the territories occupied by these countries are the leftovers from the true rulers. In other words, before the true powerhouses, these powerhouses of the empires are only some secular powerhouses. Hearing these words, Qin Wushuang was truly surprised. He had never heard of such news before. From the knowledge he had before, the upper-ranking empires should be the highest existence in the Tianxian land. And now, hearing his teacher's words, it seemed that these empires were only the peripheral powerhouses. Could it be the true elite warriors of the Tianxian land were not limited to these? Apparently, Tan Zhongqi had expected Qin Wushuang to have such reaction as he laughed. Wushuang, it's not your fault. The Tianxian land is as vast as the sea. As for how big it is, I am afraid that even the head palace master would not know. Since you were born in a subordinate country like the Bayou country, it's understandable that you do not have much information. Even a martial saint of your Bayou country only knows a little. Currently, I am an advanced stage warrior. In the Great Luo Empire, of course, I am unquestionably one of the top warriors. Even the head palace master is only an advanced stage warrior. Only, he is slightly better than me in terms of power. With our strength, it's more than enough to show off before people like the old devil Jiyin. However, when placed on the highest stage of the Tianxian land, I am afraid that we would not be ranked. Not to mention others, the 3 upper-ranking empires all have elite warriors at the perfect stage of the spiritual martial force. Just this point alone is not something that the powerhouses of the middle-ranking empires could compare with. When he said here, Tan Zhongqi's tone was full of emotions. There will definitely be 4 chapters today. If all goes well, there will be a 2nd chapter or even a 3rd chapter in the afternoon. Chapter 149. Each of the 5 palace masters of the Stargaze Palace was an advanced stage warrior. However, despite being advanced stage warriors, there was a huge difference between each of them. Below the palace masters, the Shakyamuni and the elders were all middle stage warriors. There were no exceptions. However, even among the middle stage warriors, there were differences in strength. Wushuang, in the Tianxian land, there are a few places you must not go. Tan Zhongqi instructed, you must remember these forbidden places. For example, the Xian Yuan Mound, the Illusion Heavenly Lake, the Endless Eastern Sea, the Extreme North Snowfield. Qin Wushuang listened attentively. Just these names alone had fascinated him. It was rumored that these places are the true rulers of the Tianxian land. Some of them are controlled by human warriors with higher strength, and some are controlled by some other powerful species. These places have the most abundant spiritual qi and are the core of the entire Tianxian land. Unfortunately, our human countries can only move around the border of these places. Other species? Qin Wushuang blinked his eyes and asked with a face full of questions. Yes, in the human countries, these species do not have much living space and are treasured. However, in the soil where they live, their reproduction ability is no less than humans. Besides, most of the territories they occupy are superior to the human countries. If they're not humans, could they be beasts? Qin Wushuang asked curiously. Strictly speaking, they are not beasts. They belong to the same intelligent species. Only, their appearance is somewhat different from humans. They are more similar to beasts. Thus, sometimes they are called beasts. In fact, a more accurate name is the demon clan. They are born from nature, grow in nature, and absorb the power of nature. As long as one enters the upper sky realm, they can be called the demon clan. The demon clan includes birds and beasts, those that walk on the ground, climb on the trees, and swim in the sea. They are all called the demon clan. The power of the demon clan is unimaginable in the human countries. If it weren't for a group of powerful warriors that control part of the Tianxian land with abundant spiritual qi, I am afraid there would not be any space for humans to live in the Tianxian land. Tan Zhongqi sighed and said seriously, Wu Shuang, for now, don't think about these things. Unless, one day, you have trained to surpass us 5 palace masters and enter the perfect stage. Otherwise, these secrets are destined to remain secrets and have little to do with you. Qin Wushuang smiled and said, Sure, Zuin, even if it's just for fun, it's always good to know more. Don't worry, I won't bite off more than I can chew. I know my limits. That's good. Tan Zhongqi said, Master's first expectation for you is to enter the core disciple class. There were only 4 months left until the year-end assessment. You have to work hard. Those who had entered the ranks of core disciples were all Xiantian disciples. Don't let your guard down. Disciple understands. Qin Wushuang was in awe, thinking that this was indeed the #1 sect in the great Luo Empire. There were more than 100 Xiantian disciples, and this did not include the high-level experts. No wonder when the Stargaze Palace spoke, even a fierce figure like the old Devil Ji Yin had to yield. Initially, Qin Wushuang was somewhat surprised. Now, he realized the light after experiencing the powerful strength of the Stargaze Palace. Then, he thought about his teacher's words. In the entire Tianxian land, the great Luo Empire was still a marginal powerhouse. Even among the secular empires, there were still 3 upper-ranking empires suppressing them. It seemed that in this world, it was not an easy task to stand at the peak. Okay, since you're my direct disciple, of course you should have a private territory in the Green Cloud Palace. Later, go and choose a secret training room that belongs to you. In the Stargaze Palace, usually only the core disciples have their own private rooms in each palace. You are an exception. Thank you for your kindness. Qin Wushuang knew that Tan Zhongqi was taking special care of him. No need to be so courteous. As long as you show your face in the year-end exam, it would be more effective than 10,000 nice words to make me proud. When I test my disciples, I look at their grades and character. I don't care about the rest. I understand. Qin Wushuang liked Tan Zhongqi's style that focused on efficiency and did not like excessive formalities. After he took Qin Wushuang to choose a secret room, Tan Zhongqi said again, From now on, this is your private place. Unless there are special circumstances, even the elders of the Stargaze Palace are not allowed to barge in. This is not only a secret training room, but also a private warehouse. You can hide any important things inside. You don't have to worry about losing them. I understand. Tan Zhongqi nodded. Okay, take your plate, and you can now enter the Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range to train. The Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range extends for tens of thousands of miles. Even the ancestors of the Stargaze Palace could not travel to every corner. Remember, besides the Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range, you can take any other place. Yes, there is one thing you must remember. Competition exists between any disciple in the Stargaze Palace, including disciples from the same faction. Due to the rarity of resources, once some natural treasures appear, most likely, there would be competition between disciples. At that time, you must use all your strength to take it. Do not decline. The Stargaze Palace does not advocate killing disciples, but we do value the strong. If you have the strength, go ahead and take it. As long as you do not kill your fellow disciples, you are allowed to use any methods. Remember, for words, do not decline your responsibility. Qin Wushuang nodded solemnly. I will remember your teachings. Okay, on the 8th day of the 12th lunar month, during the Laba festival, you must gather at the Green Cloud Palace. At that time, I will introduce you to the other disciples. In these 3 or 4 months, you're free to do as you wish. Before the year-end exam, I will not teach you any skills. And since you killed Li Wuji, at least for now, you do not need to worry about your combat techniques. Now, your most important task is to consolidate your upper sky realm, understand the mysteries of the upper sky realm, feel the natural power, and grasp the essence of absorbing the natural power. Here is a book called 6 Questions of Absorbing Spiritual Qi. It talks about how to absorb and use the natural power at the spiritual martial force. It is very suitable for those who have just entered the upper sky realm. You can refer to it, but do not copy it completely. Understand? Yes, I understand. Qin Wushuang took it and put it in his chest. He smiled again. Any ancient book is only the experience of the predecessors. It is worth referencing, but not copying. It is better to not have books. Everyone's training path, habits, and talent are different. Tan Zhongqi nodded with satisfaction. He liked Qin Wushuang no matter how he looked at him. Such a disciple who could infer many things from one example had a high comprehension ability that surpassed any disciple he had taken in before. Wushuang, during this time, you can go to the Virtuous Cloud Summit or other places. I will not restrict your activities. You can go anywhere within the Great Luo Empire. But if you want to leave the country, you must get my permission. It was not that Tan Zhongqi wanted to restrict his freedom, but for safety reasons. After all, the Tianxian land was as vast as the sea, and there were as many elite warriors as the clouds. An initial stage upper sky realm was insignificant in the entire Tianxian land. He did not have the qualifications to wander around. For now, Qin Wushuang did not plan to leave the country as he nodded in agreement. After listening to his teacher's instructions, Qin Wushuang familiarized himself with the general terrain of the Stargaze Palace. Then, he headed towards the back mountain. To train, he must find a quiet place. Although he could not enter the Virtuous Cloud Summit, he could at least enter the Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range. There were countless mountain peaks in the Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range, and only a few hundred advanced disciples. Although it seemed like a lot of people in the 20,000 miles area of the Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range, they were only a drop in the ocean. If it wasn't a coincidence, the chance for disciples to meet each other was extremely small. Think about it. Within the 20,000 miles area, there were a few hundred people. One could imagine how small the chance would be to meet each other. For sure, the major sects were the major sections. Their training grounds were as big as a subordinate country. For your information, the Bayou country only had 20 or 30,000 miles of land. However, the Bayou country had 32 states and 600 million people, and this Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range only allowed a few hundred advanced disciples to enter. One could imagine how big the difference was. Now, Qin Wushuang understood more and more why each of the people in this world wanted to climb up the ladder. The higher the position, the more resources they would have. The difference between the two had almost reached a monstrous level. After entering the Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range, Qin Wushuang did not dare to let down his guard. Before he left, his teacher had told him that although this Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range was the territory of the Stargaze Palace, it was not completely free of demonic beasts. Disciples of the Stargaze Palace were not allowed to kill each other. However, if he was unlucky and met a demonic beast during training, then he would have to pray for himself. After picking a steep mountain peak, Qin Wushuang walked through the mountain range and felt the rich presence of the Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range. Indeed, the spiritual qi of this Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range was much richer than the Martial Saint Mountain. In the past, before Qin Wushuang had entered the upper sky realm, he was not sensitive to this feeling. He only stayed in a hazy state of understanding. After entering the upper sky realm, Qin Wushuang's perception of the spiritual qi seemed to have been enlightened. He felt it extremely clear and natural. It was easy to grasp the difference between the two. Indeed, this Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range is extraordinary. Compared to this, the Martial Saint Mountain is truly a remote and desolate place. No wonder there are so many upper sky realm warriors in the Stargaze Palace. The Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range has contributed a lot. Even at this Virtuous Cloud Mountain Range, I still could not find the feeling I had when I first entered that cave in the Great Song Mountain. Qin Wushuang remembered the experience at that cave in the cliff of the Great Song Mountain. Until now, it was still vivid in his mind, and he could not forget it. The feeling of that baptism was too wonderful. Now, thinking back, that baptism should be the process of the spiritual qi filling the body. It was that process that had allowed him to enter the upper sky realm. Only he could not understand that if that baptism was the spiritual chi filling the body, how could his body endure such strong spiritual chi? Usually, if the body did not reach a certain level of strength and could not endure the natural spiritual chi, the only result would be death from the explosion of the body. However, at that time, he was safe and sound. In fact, he even enjoyed it. All of this seemed to have gone against the common sense of the upper sky spiritual martial force. Perhaps those 5 mystical lights have some other mysteries. As Qin Wushuang thought about it, he started to look for a quiet corner. He was going to find a place to study that 6 questions of absorbing soul that his teacher had given him. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 150. The 6 questions of absorbing spiritual chi covered the training of the entire spiritual martial force. To put it bluntly, it would answer some of the main questions on how to absorb the natural power. Although it was a beginner's book, it explained the profound knowledge in simple terms and explained the knowledge of absorbing spiritual chi clearly. When one reached the upper sky spiritual martial force, the core problem was to absorb the natural power and use the body as a medium to form a strong power. Thus, after entering the upper sky spiritual martial force, the strength of a martial artist will be determined by his ability to absorb and use the natural power. On this core problem, Qin Wushuang had already received the guidance from the martial Saint Mountain and had basically grasped it. Only, after understanding this core problem, he still had a lot of knowledge to learn. Absorbing natural spiritual energy was a long process, but it was also a huge field of study. How to absorb it and where to absorb it. The process of absorbing the natural power was in fact a process of refining the spiritual chi. Most of the absorption of the natural power relied on training. During training, one would trigger the natural power and merge it with the body to transform it into one's own power. It was a slow process. Of course, there were exceptions. This small portion of exceptions relied on absorbing the natural spiritual objects to quickly acquire spiritual chi. It was a fast process. This direct absorption process was equivalent to a shortcut, and naturally, it was attractive. Only, to absorb it directly, one must have 2 requirements. First, one must have a strong body and enough bearing capacity. Or else, this direct absorption process would be extremely tyrannical and had a strong impact. If the body did not have enough bearing capacity, it would be extremely dangerous. Most importantly, to directly absorb the spiritual chi, one would need a technique and spiritual objects to absorb it. Everyone knew that in the great Luo Empire, spiritual objects were extremely precious. Regardless of spiritual medicine or spiritual beast cores, they were all extremely rare. Basically, when one obtained one, it would become a medicinal material to make pills. One would never be so extravagant as to directly extract it. Although directly extracting, it was a shortcut to quickly increase one's spiritual chi. The risk was high. There would also be a loss of a certain amount of spiritual chi, and the degree of development would not be high. For these gains and losses, the martial artist would need to grasp them and make a choice according to the actual situation. Qin Wushuang flipped through the 6 questions of absorbing spiritual chi and had a general understanding. This upper sky knowledge was indeed vast. Initial stage, middle stage, advanced stage, perfect stage. Every level had a completely different concept within it. Within the 4 major realms, there were countless small realms and small steps that separated the countless upper sky warriors of the spiritual martial force into a strong and weak ladder. The power of nature included the basic power of the 5 elements, the power of wind, rain, thunder, and lightning. Everything that was related to the natural operation of the universe had the power of nature. It all depended on how the cultivator absorbed it, carried it, and used it. Qin Wushuang was currently practicing the coagulated sword, which was the 5th stage, the real sword realm. If one were to break it down, there would be different attributes. However, in the entire 5th grade, the division of attributes was not clear. Only in the 4th grade, the gang sword, would there be a clear division of attributes. Currently, in the 5th grade realm, it was only a prototype. However, this did not affect the power of the true sword. In reality, the coagulated sword was a battle technique that was profound and profound. The 5th stage was already the upper sky realm, and as he continued to train, each time he improved, the stage would also increase significantly. When he reached the 1st stage, it would be unimaginable. Currently, Qin Wushuang was not biting off more than he could chew. Instead, he focused on practicing the true sword. Currently, he was only an initial stage warrior. To him, the solid sword was more than enough for him to use. If he were to force himself to practice a higher level sword intent, it would not be good. Currently, this virtuous cloud mountain range was full of spiritual qi and was the best place to practice the true sword. He decided to consolidate this technique and strive to use it more maturely in actual combat. Combined with the immortal virtuous cloud steps, this coagulated sword was indeed a rare battle technique. Qin Wushuang knew the principle of biting off more than he could chew. In this 1 month, he only focused on the combination of these two techniques. Initially, during the battle with Li Wuji, if he had a month to practice these two techniques, that battle would not have dragged on for so long and become so complicated. Unfortunately, the situation at that time was too urgent and the situation was too hasty. Li Wuji came without any warning. This caused Qin Wushuang to be in a passive position. After a month, Qin Wushuang walked out from a dark. After a month of intensive training, not only had Qin Wushuang consolidated his spiritual martial force, he had also gained a great harvest. He had perfectly combined the true sword attack of the coagulated sword with the immortal virtuous cloud steps. He had almost reached a flawless stage. After gaining this confidence, Qin Wushuang firmly believed that if he were to fight with Li Wuji now, he would be able to win much more easily. Qin Wushuang decided to travel around. In the process of training, not only did he need to meditate, he also needed to have enough experience. Reading 10,000 books was not as good as walking 10,000 miles. On the path of training, the principle was the same. Sometimes, sitting for 3 months would not be as good as traveling for half a month. When traveling, if he had a moment of enlightenment, it would be as good as half a year of hard training. The 20,000-mile numinous cloud mountain range was indeed as deep as the ocean. Qin Wushuang walked for half a month and did not meet anyone. Although he was mentally prepared, it still made Qin Wushuang feel deeply moved. But after a while, he felt relieved. Although the numinous cloud mountain range was vast, there were only a few hundred advanced disciples. Most of the people here were probably training in a fixed corner. If a small number of people were traveling, it would not be easy for them to meet in a large area of 20,000 miles. As dusk approached, Qin Wushuang raised his head and looked at the sky. He knew that he probably would not gain anything today. He wanted to find a place to stay for the night and leave tomorrow morning. Suddenly, the sound of birds came from the forest behind him. A group of birds rushed out of the forest and flew out of the forest in panic, scattering in all directions. Qin Wushuang stopped in his tracks. He knew that something was happening behind him. Turning his head, he saw a fiery red bird. It was not an ordinary bird. It was much bigger and looked like an eagle with a pair of big wings. It was very arrogant and domineering as it circled above the forest. When this fiery red bird saw Qin Wushuang, it obviously wanted to show off. It screeched and kept flapping its wings, beating the trees. Wherever it went, those big trees were like clay sculptures. They were easily cut in two by its big wings. It swept all the way over with irresistible force. The evil beast had a hook at the corner of its mouth. It was cold and sharp, very sinister. It was emitting a strong, offensive power. Flapping its wings, it circled 30 to 40 meters in front of Qin Wushuang. One man and one bird were confronting each other. It was absolutely impossible for an ordinary bird to have such an exaggerated attack power. It was most likely an innate spiritual bird. Qin Wushuang was secretly shocked. He thought that his luck was really extraordinary. He heard from his master that the probability of encountering a spirit beast in the soaring cloud mountain range was not high. The probability of encountering one in the soaring cloud mountain range was relatively higher. He did not expect to encounter an innate spiritual beast without even entering the soaring cloud mountain range. It was Qin Wushuang's first time encountering a legendary spirit beast. He did not dare to underestimate it. This spirit beast was obviously a little irritable. It seemed to be in a hurry. Seeing Qin Wushuang standing in front of it, it saw that he still did not back down after showing off its power. It flapped its wings and charged towards Qin Wushuang. It grabbed at the air with its claws. Countless gusts of wind shot down like sharp arrows. This attack was not the least bit weaker than Li Wuji's thunder palms. In fact, it was even more imposing. It was just that spirit beasts did not have cultivation techniques after all. They could not attack in groups like Li Wuji and form an attack circle. Otherwise, with the speed of this attack, it would be even more difficult to withstand than Li Wuji's attack. Qin Wushuang moved continuously with his immortal ascendant cloud steps. He ignored the beast's attack and observed the spirit beast's attack characteristics as he walked. Its attack strength was mainly focused on its claws and mouth. However, its wings had never been developed. For spirit beasts of the bird type, the wings were always a hidden part of their attack that could not be underestimated. There was no way Qin Wushuang would be negligent. After defending for a while, he had already figured out some tricks. He purposely slowed down his footsteps and was prepared to let the beast fly lower so that he could counterattack with a heavenly meridian condensed sword. Every part of a connate spiritual beast was a treasure. The body was a treasure, and the spirit beast elixir in the body was even more priceless. The spirit beast elixir of a connate spiritual beast was a rare item, whether it was for refining elixirs or extracting spirit energy. Qin Wushuang was naturally tempted. This was his first time encountering a connate spiritual beast. If he could not destroy it and take it as a spoils of war, it would be a fly in the ointment. As expected, his initiative to show weakness made the spirit beast's attacks even more unbridled. Normally, although spirit beasts were not as intelligent as humans, they were also very cunning and suspicious. They would never attack rashly. However, this spirit beast seemed to be eager to pass through Qin Wushuang's obstruction. Every attack was very fierce. Qin Wushuang thought, could it be that this spirit beast was chased here by others? Is it in a hurry to pass through here to get rid of the pursuers? With a thought, he sensed carefully. Indeed, he heard the sound of wind blowing grass behind him. Although it was far away, it did not escape Qin Wushuang's ears. Yo! Qin Wushuang let out a low moan and moved his body, allowing the spirit beast to scurry past. After making a path for him, he followed closely behind. His steps were light and quick, and he didn't let go. He knew that it was not one or two people who were chasing after this connate spiritual beast. It was very likely that it was a group of people. Otherwise, a spirit beast would not be in such a panic. Qin Wushuang was alone. Even if he could defeat this spirit beast, he would have to put in a lot of effort. If his spirit energy was exhausted and that group of people caught up, it would instead let them take advantage of the situation. Qin Wushuang was unwilling to do something that would cause him to suffer a loss. Therefore, he let this spirit beast fly past while he chased from behind. He would only make a move when he got rid of the pursuers. Otherwise, it would continue to be a tug of war like running and competing in leg strength. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 151. That spiritual beast obviously didn't expect Qin Wushuang to suddenly give way. Just a moment ago, it was still in a desperate state. Now that he suddenly gave way, it was naturally very surprised. In terms of sprinting speed, Innate spiritual beasts were definitely much faster than human innate rankers. But in terms of leg strength, human innate rankers had a lot of advantages in terms of endurance. Between innate rankers, it didn't matter even if you managed to shake them off for a short period of time. This was because innate rankers didn't need to rely on sight to chase after innate rankers. With the sensing of innate rankers and the ability to judge the escape route, they were all as reliable as sight. In other words, no matter how far you shook them off, as long as the innate ranker could sense it, you wouldn't be able to shake them off. This spiritual beast rushed past Qin Wushuang's defense and obtained enough space to immediately dash towards the sky. Its strategy was very obvious. It wanted to use the height to shake off Qin Wushuang and the pursuers behind it. For human innate rankers, unless your cultivation had reached an abnormal level, you wouldn't be able to fly. Qin Wushuang chased for a while and could only rely on the sensing of innate ranker's ranker to follow. If this spiritual beast kept flying in the sky, he knew that he wouldn't be able to do anything. But as long as it descended, it wouldn't be able to escape his pursuit. This evil beast is quite cunning. When it was stopped by me previously, it didn't dare to dash towards the sky because it was too close to me. It was afraid that it would leave an opening for me to attack. Now that it has shaken me off and has enough space, it really flew towards the sky. It seems that the intelligence of spiritual beasts isn't any less than that of humans. Qin Wushuang was somewhat regretful. The reason why he gave way just now was because he didn't want to clash with this spiritual beast and let the pursuers take advantage of the situation. But by giving way, he gave the spiritual beast enough space to fly towards the sky. If it didn't descend, he wouldn't be able to do anything to it. He had to admit that he had miscalculated just now. It was his first time facing a spiritual beast, so his experience was still lacking. If he had a bow or arrow-type innate ranker weapon, he would definitely be able to make this spiritual beast stay. Unfortunately, he only had the saber he got from Li Wuji, so he couldn't use long-range attacks. What Qin Wushuang didn't expect was that after the spirit bird got rid of him, it seemed to deliberately provoke him. From time to time, it would dive down to demonstrate its strength, and then fly back to the sky. Just like that, one night passed, and Qin Wushuang had already traveled thousands of miles. Qin Wushuang was also infuriated by it. He thought, "This evil creature is provoking us like this. I'm afraid it has other motives. Could it be that there's another trap for me to fall into? Otherwise, why would you come down and provoke me after escaping from the danger zone?" Thinking of this, he suppressed the anger in his heart and calmed down. He absolutely could not let it take the initiative. Otherwise, in this kind of tug-of-war, it was hard to say who would win and who would lose. If they were to be lured into a spirit beast lair, that would truly be a living hell. Qin Wushuang decided to loosen the reins only to grasp them better. With this thought in mind, he slowed down. His footsteps slowed down, and he purposely appeared to be very tired, showing weakness to the enemy. This was the first step of Qin Wushuang's strategy. If he wanted to loosen the reins only to grasp them better, he must confuse the other party. This spirit bird was obviously very intelligent. To confuse it was definitely not easy, and he absolutely couldn't overdo it. After a night of running, it was normal to show a bit of fatigue. After chasing for a while, Qin Wushuang stopped in front of a dense forest. He jumped onto a big tree and simply lay down on a branch to rest. His appearance easily gave people the feeling that his spiritual power was insufficient. After all, those who cultivated in the numinous sky mountain range were only advanced disciples, not core disciples. Even if they entered the Xiantian realm, it was normal for them to have insufficient spiritual power. Adjusting his breathing and resting his spirit, Qin Wushuang was incomparably satisfied. He almost forgot about the spirit bird and leisurely started to cultivate. Sure enough, after a few hours, the spirit bird circled back. It chirped twice above Qin Wushuang's head, but was unwilling to land. It was obviously using its voice to test Qin Wushuang's reaction. Qin Wushuang was basically certain that this spirit bird was up to something. Perhaps it was fishing. When he thought of this, he was calm and collected. It was certainly good to be able to eliminate this spirit bird, but if there was a chance, he would absolutely not act rashly. After a night of racing, the group of pursuers behind him had long been shaken off. It could be said that the current situation was a battle between Qin Wushuang and this spirit bird. He wanted to hunt this spirit bird, and this spirit bird was obviously luring him. Both parties were anxious like this. Qin Wushuang was unmoved. No matter how the spirit bird chirped, he didn't move or look. His self-restraint was very calm, but this spirit bird couldn't remain calm. It opened its claws and directly shot out a few sharp attack blades. With the sound of the wind, it pierced through the air. Like a bolt from the blue, it cut through the void and shot straight towards him. Qin Wushuang turned over and dodged, jumping down from the tree. He wasn't afraid of this spirit bird attacking, but he was afraid that it wouldn't attack. If it attacked, he could completely use the immortal Lingyun steps to deal with this evil creature. He could also pretend to be weak and use the previously formulated strategy to eliminate it. Earlier, he had almost succeeded. If it wasn't for the group of pursuers behind him, Qin Wushuang would have had a very good chance to lure this spirit bird to close the distance. Once this distance was closed, it would enter the attack range of the coagulated sword. Qin Wushuang would definitely be able to kill this spirit bird if he attacked fiercely with both hands. Seeing Qin Wushuang turn over and jump down from the tree, the spirit bird hesitated for a moment but still rushed down. Its two claws moved continuously, and it kept clawing out sharp blades like a whirlwind. Its pair of claws was actually more powerful than any weapon. Every row of attacks cut down the rows of trees in the forest, and those big trees fell in rows. Qin Wushuang only blocked and didn't counterattack. The situation looked as embarrassing as it could be. He didn't believe that no matter how sensitive and vigilant this spirit bird was, could it be able to keep calm and not attack at close range? Sure enough, after Qin Wushuang continuously showed his weak side and embarrassing side, the spirit bird's confidence and arrogance had more or less stirred up. The distance of the attack was also getting closer and closer. Qin Wushuang suddenly shook his arms, and a rumbling force shot out from his palms. Thunder Palm. This was a superficial attack that Qin Wushuang learned from Li Wuji's secret manual. Using it at this time, his original intention was naturally not to attack this spirit bird. Instead, it was to further reduce the opponent's vigilance. Although this Thunder Palm was imposing, it actually only contained 50% of the essence. It was naturally no problem to attack ordinary birds, but to attack this spirit bird, it was obviously not enough. After shooting out several Thunder Palms, the spirit bird was even more delighted. Its wings swept to the left and right, and directly swept away the remaining power of the Thunder Palm. Suddenly, it roared loudly and flapped its wings. Lightning flashed, and sparks flew everywhere. Hundreds of wings, like sharp arrows, shot towards Qin Wushuang at high speed. This row of attacks was fast, fierce, and caught him off guard. There was no sign at all. Qin Wushuang saw that the wings were coming at him menacingly, and knew that it must be a very powerful attack. Swaying left and right with the immortal Lingyun steps, he constantly jumped and dodged the attacks. Sure enough, this evil creature's wings are hiding many secrets. I'm afraid that these wing attacks are just a test, and there are even more powerful moves inside. Qin Wushuang's thoughts turned, and he rushed to the east and rushed to the west. His speed was neither fast nor slow, and he was still using his tactic to mislead the enemy. That spirit bird indeed swooped down for more than 10 meters, and at this moment, it was only 20 meters away from Qin Wushuang's head. In fact, it had already entered the attack range. But in order to ensure the strength and accuracy of the attack, Qin Wushuang decided to endure a little longer. If he wanted to attack, he had to aim for a sure hit, or else he would not rashly use his trump card. Once the attack failed, this spirit bird would become alert and fearful, and if he wanted it to come down again, it would be almost impossible. A spirit bird's vigilance was very strong. In other words, either he succeeded or gave up, there were only these two possibilities. Seeing that Qin Wushuang did not continue to attack, the spirit bird's vigilance was obviously slowly relaxing, and it thought that Qin Wushuang's strength was only so-so. Suddenly, it flapped its wings rapidly and suddenly closed them. It suddenly opened them, closed them again, and suddenly opened them again. This action was repeated 6 times in a row. Every time, the two wings brought out a turbulent airflow, and this airflow continued to accumulate, converging at a certain core area, forming a mass of air and tightly wrapping the surrounding void. This mass of air actually produced a very strong suction force, wrapping up the surrounding leaves and sand, forming a whirlpool in the center, and the shape was very strange. Suddenly, the spirit bird's wings flapped outwards, and that huge cyclone was directly pushed out. The terrifying spatial airflow rippled in the void, and like a detonated bomb, it radiated a powerful attack wave in all directions. Boom! It was as if a strange ripple had appeared in the void, and the ripple spread in all directions. Qin Wushuang's footsteps retreated, and he knocked into more than 10 big trees, but he did not stop retreating at all. Seeing that Qin Wushuang was retreating at such a high speed, the spirit bird would not let it go. It hurriedly followed, constantly activating all the strength in its body, and constantly pushing that powerful cyclone towards Qin Wushuang. Qin Wushuang used the immortal ascending cloud steps, swaying left and right, like a leaf at the tip of a storm, completely unable to control itself, swaying left and right. Suddenly, Qin Wushuang's body seemed to have been installed with a spring, and suddenly spread out, breaking away from the area controlled by the whirlpool, and dodged to the back. The chance had come. Both hands moved, the little Shang sword, middle rushing sword, left and right continuously shooting out. These 2 consecutive changes, the speed was so fast that it could not be described with words. It was like a drowning person who was clearly at the edge of the abyss of despair, but suddenly jumped up, full of energy, and cleaved through the waves. The situation was reversed in an instant. The spirit bird evidently did not expect that Qin Wushuang would suddenly break away from the suction force of the airflow, and completely did not expect that the attack of the coagulated sword would be so tyrannical. Chi-Chi, left and right, both attacks hit. The little Zhe sword hit the left wing, and the middle rushing sword hit the right wing. In an instant, both wings of the spirit bird were injured, and it shrieked mournfully, wanting to escape. But its wings were hit by an innate master. How could it escape? Before it could escape into the sky, Qin Wushuang's fingers moved consecutively, hitting all the vital parts of its body, and it fell from the sky in despair and fell to the ground. To be continued. If you want to know what happened, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 152. Qin Wushuang was overjoyed at this turn of events. After enduring for so long, in the end, he had shot down this spiritual beast. Regardless of how intelligent the spiritual beasts were compared to humans, they still lacked schemes. They relied more on their own intelligence and primitive craftiness. In a battle of wits and power, they lost and became Qin Wushuang's spoils of war. According to his teacher, during the training period, unless it was a major harvest, they did not need to turn in their personal spoils of war. He encouraged the disciples of the Stargaze Palace to own private property. However, the premise was that you must earn your own private property and not be given by the sect. To put it bluntly, it was to encourage the disciples to be self-sufficient. Qin Wushuang knew that for such upper sky spiritual beast, the most valuable part would be that inner core. However, the entire body of this spiritual beast was a treasure. Of course, Qin Wushuang would not let go of any valuable things. He packed up and took everything he could and did not leave anything behind. The instant when that spiritual beast had fallen, in a remote corner of the virtuous cloud mountain range, the expression of a black-clothed man changed. He immediately used his spiritual perception and frowned. How could this be? He tried to sense it 3 times, and the result was the same. Indeed, one of the 3 spiritual beasts he controlled had been killed. He had trained these spiritual beasts when he was still a cub. In these years, he had been using them to fish, to lure some initial stage warriors who had just entered the upper sky realm into the trap he had set up beforehand. From there, he would kill these initial stage warriors who had fallen into the trap and use their bodies and upper sky chi to increase his strength quickly. It had been 3 years since he had started this plan. During this time, 2 initial stage warriors had already lost their lives to his methods and became his stepping stones to increase his strength. In these 3 years, he had never failed and no one had discovered him. However, this time, one of the flame cloud vultures he had sent out had died. It was something that had never happened before. These 3 spiritual beasts were his most precious treasures. Now, one of them had been killed. It was like cutting off his flesh. Such anger could not be described in a few words. He decided to go take a look and make the other party pay the price. It's unforgivable to kill my flame cloud vultures. The flame cloud vultures were full of intelligence. If they had encountered a middle or advanced stage warrior, they would not have gone to provoke them. For sure, the other party was only at the initial stage. That's why the flame cloud vultures went up to lure them. Humph, initial stage warrior, just wait to sacrifice your life to my flame cloud vultures. This black-clothed man with a sinister expression on his face. He rushed in the general direction of the flame cloud vulture's accident. At the same time, he used the spirit manipulation technique to summon the other 2 flame cloud vultures. Initially, he was an initial stage warrior. Now, after absorbing the upper sky spiritual chi from 2 initial stage warriors, regardless of his body or spiritual chi, he was extremely outstanding at the initial stage. Compared to ordinary initial stage warriors, he was much more ahead. In addition, he also had 2 Sciention spiritual beasts under his control. The combination of 1 man and 2 spiritual beasts was even more powerful. Naturally, he was more confident. At this moment, he only had one thought in his mind, and that was to find the person who killed his flame cloud vulture and kill him with his own hands. Then he would seize his body and absorb his connate spiritual chi, turning it into his own. On the other hand, Qin Wushuang quickly left that troublesome place after he had taken the inner core of the flame cloud vultures. He knew that there were pros and cons to this matter. From the reaction of this spiritual beast, for sure, it was not a lone spiritual beast. For sure, it had helpers. Just as he was walking back, suddenly, Qin Wushuang stopped his footsteps. He took out the inner core of the flame cloud vultures and sensed it carefully. After a moment, he shook his head helplessly. It seemed that there were many things to learn in this world. While he was on his way, he felt that the spiritual chi of this inner core was slowly draining away. To an upper sky inner core, if it lost too much spiritual chi, it would become a useless inner core after a certain period of time. An upper sky inner core that had lost its spiritual chi was worthless. It seems that this upper sky inner core needs a corresponding preservation method. It needs special tools to preserve the spiritual chi and prevent the spiritual chi from being drained away. However, at Qin Wushuang's stage, not only did he not have the tools, he did not know the corresponding methods. Therefore, the spiritual chi of the inner core was draining away without restraint. Although the speed was not very fast, at least half of the spiritual chi would be drained away after 3 to 5 days. At that time, a good upper sky inner core would immediately depreciate and no one would be interested in it, regardless of whether it was used to refine pills or in other ways. The inner core of a spiritual beast with impure spiritual chi would definitely be less effective. It might even be useless. A troublesome matter appeared. Qin Wushuang was very distressed as he held the inner core in his hand. He did not have any storage tools that could nurture spiritual chi, nor did he know any storage methods that could prevent the spiritual chi from being drained away. If I don't want to waste the spiritual chi, perhaps I can only use this inner core on the spot. This spiritual beast's inner core is the main ingredient for refining pills. It's a pity that the dragon and tiger body sculpting pill's main ingredient in the pill recipe left behind by Li Wuji wasn't this flame cloud vulture. Moreover, I don't know how to refine pills. It seems that if I want to use this inner core, I can only directly absorb its spiritual qi. Otherwise, I can only watch as its spiritual qi drains away. This depressing feeling was too great. Qin Wushuang pondered, to absorb this inner core, I need a cultivation method and my body to have enough capacity. This cultivation method is a big problem. If he only used ordinary methods, it would already be good if he could absorb 1/10 of the spiritual qi in this inner core. Without a special absorption skill, it was basically impossible to absorb 100% of the spiritual energy in here. Cultivation method, Qin Wushuang muttered in his heart. Suddenly, he thought of something. In my previous life, there were a few cultivation methods that had similar effects. For example, the power of deep north and the asteroid assimilation art were both different methods of achieving the same result. Especially the power of deep north. It was no small matter. The asteroid assimilation art was more or less derived from the power of deep north. Whether in terms of profoundness or power, it was far inferior to the power of deep north. The power of deep north, as the name implied, took the meaning of the deep North Sea. The deep North Sea was compared to a person's dantian. When Qin Wushuang thought of this, he suddenly had a bold idea. He decided to give it a try. The introductory cultivation method of the power of deep north was not complicated. It was simple. The cultivation threshold of the power of deep north was far lower than that of the coagulated sword. It could even be said that it was very easy to get started with the power of deep north. Almost as long as one was a martial artist, there was hope to cultivate the power of deep north. Its core problem was in 2 steps, absorption and application. The absorption process was not complicated. One only needed to make a good hand gesture, grasp a degree of absorption, and be able to guide and transfer it correctly. The whole process was absolutely not complicated. The difficulty lay in the question of how to use it. In the ancient martial arts world of his previous life, there were countless postnatal masters who cultivated the power of deep north. However, most of them could only absorb it and could not completely apply it. Some even did not know how to apply it and did not know how to digest it. The absorbed inner strength became a burden on the body. Of course, the cultivation in his previous life was limited to the postnatal realm. Now, the absorption of spiritual qi was within the postnatal realm. Naturally, it could not be mentioned in the same breath. However, in the ancient martial arts world of his previous life, the postnatal realm was only the tip of the iceberg for many peerless martial arts techniques. In fact, many of them continued to the postnatal realm. For example, the coagulated sword, the immortal virtuous cloud steps, and the power of deep north all shared the same principle. The part that the postnatal realm warriors cultivated was only the tip of the iceberg. It was far from the entirety of these top techniques. In Qin Wushuang's mind, he had almost memorized all the top martial arts techniques from his previous life. It was like a moving library, and he did not even need to flip through them. After a little organizing, he combed through the power of deep north in his mind and came up with an idea. This power of deep north actually had the same effect as the heavenly vein condensed sword. The key knowledge lay in the path of the lung channel of Hantayin. The knowledge of the meridians and acupoints on this path was crucial. Usually, postnatal realm warriors would use genuine qi to travel through the meridians. And upper sky spiritual martial force warriors would use spiritual qi to travel through the meridians. The principle was the same, it was just an increase in a level of power. Qin Wushuang's spiritual qi went through a few circulations in his body. Instantly, his meridians were matured by the spiritual qi. In terms of toughness and maturity, they were much stronger than those in the postnatal realm. After a few circulations, he focused on the training of the conception meridian. The conception meridian originated from the yin-yang meridian between the anus and the genitals. It went through a path and had many acupoints. However, it had a very clear path. To an elite warrior like Qin Wushuang, identifying the acupoints was almost child's play. After running it once, it felt exactly the same as what was recorded in the ancient books. This power of deep north is indeed easy to learn. However, it is not easy to train it to perfection and purity. The lung channel of Han-Tien was the conception meridian and the foundation of the power of deep north. Among them, the Shaoshang acupoint on the two thumbs and the Shanzhong acupoint between the two breasts were especially important. The Shaoshang acupoint was the starting point of absorption of the power of deep north. The absorbed spiritual qi would pass through the Naiwan Palace in the upper dantian and reach its final destination, which was the Shanzhong acupoint in the middle dantian. As the saying goes, people have 4 Cs. Among the 4 Cs, the Shanzhong acupoint was the qi C, which was where the qi C was located. It was also the vital point of storing Xiantian spiritual qi. Using the Shaoshang acupoint to absorb spiritual qi and store it in the qi C was the key to the first step of the power of deep north. Qin Wushuang sorted out the meridians and tried to use the Xiantian spiritual qi to go through the conception meridian. It was unobstructed. He went through it again 3 times in a row and immediately became very proficient. After warming it up 3 times, Qin Wushuang placed the Xiantian Niden in front of him. He opened the Shaoshang acupoint on the 2 thumbs and began to absorb the Xiantian Niden. P.S. Last time I mentioned that there was an Xiantian technique that was compatible with the coagulated sword. It has finally surfaced. I wonder if anyone has guessed it? To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 153. This attempt had made Qin Wushuang forget himself and indulge himself in this supreme state of absorption. In fact, he had a feeling of extreme enjoyment. In an instant, his body was like a hungry taodai that had been starving for thousands of years. It was very hungry, very greedy, and with a hungry speed, it quickly swallowed this Xiantian inner core. What Qin Wushuang did not expect was that once this cultivation method was activated, the spiritual energy would enter a state of transmission. Its momentum could not be suppressed, and the speed was so fast that Qin Wushuang did not expect it. His original plan was to slowly absorb it, and once his body was unable to bear it, he would immediately stop the absorption. After all, this was just a probing move. But the development of reality was completely out of his expectations. Not only did Qin Wushuang's body not show any discomfort, instead he was like a starving man, rapidly devouring the food in front of him. And the speed was completely out of Qin Wushuang's imagination. In almost a quarter of an hour, the entire Xiantian inner core was completely swallowed by him, becoming a dull, gray stone-like object, without the slightest fluctuation of spiritual energy. Unexpectedly, it was completely absorbed. Qin Wushuang panicked. Checking the condition of his body, he discovered that the blood and qi in his body were operating normally, and there was no discomfort at all. Even when he was absorbing this inner core, it did not cause his body to bear much pressure. Even his back did not sweat, and he was relaxed. He was originally worried that the capacity of his body was not enough, and that the spiritual energy absorbed would exceed the limit of his body's capacity. But now it seemed that his worries were groundless. The spiritual energy that he had absorbed had completely passed through his Naiwan Palace and entered his middle dantian's Shanzhong acupoint. Although this spiritual energy had not been completely used and had not formed a perfect fusion with Qin Wushuang's original spiritual energy, but to be able to absorb it at such an abnormal speed and without the slightest bit of resistance from his body, this already made Qin Wushuang very surprised and even amazed. Subconsciously, Qin Wushuang's 2 thumbs poked, and the Shaoshang acupoint on his left and right thumbs shot out a thick and fierce sword qi. Coagulated sword, true sword, Xiaoshang's sword. The two swords struck out at the same time, and the sword intent was completely similar. The path, speed, and strength were all exactly the same. Chi-chi, chi-chi. The swift and fierce sword chi shuttled back and forth like two flashes of light, directly shooting into the distant sky. This aura was like two dragons stretching out their heads. Regardless of whether it was the momentum or the degree of condensation of the sword chi, there was an extremely obvious improvement compared to before. So fast. Qin Wushuang clicked his tongue inwardly. The spiritual energy he just absorbed can be transformed into sword chi, and his aura will be even stronger than before. The effect is too immediate. Qin Wushuang sighed. As if in disbelief, his fingertips danced continuously. Xiaoshang's sword, Zhongcheng's sword, Guancheng's sword, Shangyang's sword, Xiaocheng's sword, Xiaoza's sword, Xiaoshang's sword, Xiaocheng's sword, Xiaoza's sword. Qin Wushuang was quite excited to experience this wild aura. This was a new discovery. To be exact, this discovery completely overturned his previous cultivation attempts. He had completely found a cultivation path that truly belonged to him, one that was suitable for him. The power of Deep North was indeed abnormal. Qin Wushuang sighed in his heart. This martial technique was called one of the 3 great martial arts manuals in my previous life. It is indeed not a small matter, and its knowledge is extremely vast. It seems that the martial arts manuals in my previous life were not as those ancient martial arts practitioners imagined, unable to enter the pre-celestial stage. The pre-celestial stage is only a realm. These martial arts manuals, in the realms, many have the meaning of the pre-celestial stage. It's just that those ancient martial arts practitioners in my previous life could only come into contact with the post-celestial stage knowledge. As for the pre-celestial stage, without reaching this level, one simply cannot sense the pre-celestial stage. These peerless martial arts manuals are similarly broad and profound. Very obviously, in my previous life, it was not that the predecessors were incompetent and did not leave behind any valuable treasures. It was that the later generations were incompetent and were unable to comprehend the essence of these peerless martial arts manuals and were unable to carry them forward. Instead, the more they practiced, the more they regressed. In the end, in the ancient martial arts world of Earth, not even a single pre-celestial stage could be found. From this, it could be seen how terrifying it was to break the era of martial arts. Qin Wushuang was overjoyed that he had gained something from practicing the power of Deep North. It could be said that he had finally entered the path of the upper sky spiritual martial force. This is all thanks to Coagulated Sword. If I didn't practice Coagulated Sword, my Xiaoshang acupoint wouldn't have been able to reach such an indestructible state. Naturally, I wouldn't have been able to absorb spiritual energy. Most importantly, the sword essence of the Coagulated Sword is the same as the power of Deep North. They both go from the Xiaoshang acupoint to the Shanzhong acupoint in the middle dantian. Initially, it was a wise decision to practice the Coagulated Sword. The more Qin Wushuang thought about it, the more he rejoiced. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that these martial techniques from his previous life were broad and profound and should not be underestimated. In the future, he must continue to develop the potential of these martial techniques. Qin Wushuang sat cross-legged and quietly breathed in and out. He was merging with the newly absorbed spiritual qi. Although this spiritual qi had already entered his dantian, it could not merge completely with his original spiritual qi. The second step of the power of Deep North was to use it. To use it, he must first merge with his own spiritual qi. Or else, if the two spiritual qi could not work together, it would interfere with each other and become a burden. Qin Wushuang did not want such a depressing matter to happen. In his previous life, he had died due to the backlash of his genuine qi. In this life, he had to be careful with each step. Especially after absorbing the spiritual qi, he must channel it reasonably and use it for his own use. The merging process was an extremely complicated process. Fortunately, this flame cloud vulture was of the fire attribute, and Qin Wushuang had just entered the upper sky realm. He was extremely sensitive to the fire attribute in the pre-sky realm. Of course, all of this was thanks to the sun force he had practiced in the pre-sky realm. Now, after absorbing the fire attribute spiritual qi and entering his dantian, there was more or less a familiar feeling. Thus, the merging process was much more ideal. At this moment, Qin Wushuang suddenly felt a trace of uneasiness. He abruptly opened his eyes and looked at the sky in a trance. A sense of crisis assaulted him. He carefully grasped it. It was as if the inner core he had just absorbed had a very strange feeling of intimacy with this aura. What's going on? I clearly had an ominous premonition in my heart. So why did I suddenly feel a sense of intimacy? Could it be that the same kind of spiritual beast has come? I'll hide for a while and see who's coming. As Qin Wushuang's thoughts reached this point, he casually threw the inner core that he had just absorbed. His figure flashed and disappeared into the boundless forest. There was a reason why he threw away this useless inner core. Since he could feel a strange sense of intimacy, it must be because he had sensed the same kind of spiritual beast. He wanted to throw a brick to attract Jade and see how many pre-sky spiritual beasts there were. After hiding for a while, two mournful cries sounded from the horizon. Obviously, they had already discovered the inner core of their companion. This method of directly stripping the inner core of its spiritual energy could be said to be the biggest nightmare for spiritual beasts. If the body was destroyed, as long as the inner core was still there was always a chance of survival. However, if the inner core was stripped of its spiritual energy, this kind of robbery was the most destructive. However, these two flame cloud vultures were clearly well trained. One of them hovered high up in the sky and scanned the surroundings with a pair of sharp eyes, searching for danger. The other one swooped down and flew up with the inner core in its beak, with one on the ground and one on guard, one high and one low. Regardless of whether they were attacking or defending, they were completely organized and didn't need to fear the attacks of the hidden forces in the surroundings. As long as there were hidden forces, the flame cloud vulture in the sky would definitely discover them before they made a move. This kind of tactical coordination made Qin Wushuang, who was hiding in the dark, dumbstruck. As expected, it's exactly the same as the one I killed. It seems they're from the same nest. Qin Wushuang didn't dare to act rashly. In this kind of situation, it was indeed inconvenient for him to launch any attacks. The other party's defense had obviously been set up. As long as he moved, he would be completely exposed. In that case, the spirit bird in the sky would have ample time to launch an attack. As for the spirit bird that came down, it could completely cooperate with the attack. With the two Xiantian spirit birds cooperating with each other, in addition to their unique tacit understanding, Qin Wushuang knew that there was nothing he could take advantage of even though he was confident. At most, he could only protect himself. It would be almost impossible to kill them like the first spirit bird. Moreover, these spirit birds were so intelligent that Qin Wushuang doubted whether they were domesticated. If that was the case, he still had to be on guard against the appearance of other human powerhouses. Sure enough, as Qin Wushuang expected, after a while, the two spirit birds whispered to each other and split into two sides, one on the left and one on the right. In the next moment, Qin Wushuang felt a gloomy Xiantian aura approaching from the dense forest in front of him. Although this Xiantian aura was not very heaven-defying, it had a very special temperament that made one's hair stand on end. Qin Wushuang completely sealed his Xiantian aura and hid his body in the hollow of a big tree. He could almost hear the other party's footsteps. "I know, you must be nearby," that person said in an indifferent voice. There are no other Xiantian powerhouses within a radius of 100 miles. Although you tried your best to seal your Xiantian aura, but the Xiantian aura that you left behind just now cannot be concealed. Qin Wushuang was stunned. For a moment, he could not figure out whether the other party was trying to mislead him or was he really confident in speaking like this. No matter which possibility it was, he had to be 120% alert today. He He did not expect that the other party would come so quickly and swiftly. Qin Wushuang had just killed that Xiantian spirit bird not long ago, but he could actually find this place through the exchange of Xiantian aura. This opponent was definitely not simple. If there was a battle, this battle would definitely be the most difficult and tragic battle that Qin Wushuang had ever fought since he started his martial arts career. Qin Wushuang's 5 fingers had already formed hand seals, ready to activate his Xiantian aura and launch a surprise attack. Instead of being completely passive, it was better to strike first and gain the upper hand. P.S. Today is really too tiring. Missing 2 chapters, I will definitely make up for it in 3 days. Maybe I can make up for it tomorrow. My monthly votes for the past 2 days are so low. I am being chased by the people behind me. The monthly votes for the next 2 days are increasing faster than me. Warriors of Xinghe, please offer some monthly votes first. Tomorrow, Li Tian will be ready to explode and repay the debt. Maybe 5 chapters, maybe 6 chapters. Everything is possible. Summon all the warriors of Xinghe. Summon all the votes. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 154. If it wasn't for Qin Wushuang's powerful concealment ability, he would have already been found by the other party. But since the other party was so sure that he was nearby, it was only a matter of time before they found him. Qin Wushuang waited patiently. It wasn't that he didn't want to show himself, but he wanted to give the other party a surprise attack. The man in black stood in the long grass. Suddenly, the corners of his mouth drew back, revealing a strange smile. He pursed his lips and actually started to speak. Jilihu Lu, Gudubi Lu. The syllables of each word were very simple. It was more like he was chanting some strange incantation. It wasn't any human language at all. If it had to be a human language, then it was at best the primitive language of primitive humans. It was similar to soundings. He couldn't understand any of it at all. Seeing his strange expression, Qin Wushuang knew that something was wrong. After a while, Qin Wushuang only heard rustling sounds in the grass. It was like the sound of a drizzle hitting the grass. It also sounded like there were countless crawling insects shuttling through the grass. An ominous thought flashed through his mind. Qin Wushuang glanced around. All the hair on his body stood up. Snakes. There were all kinds of colorful poisonous snakes. Some had flat heads, some had pointed heads, some had triangular heads, some had fat heads. All kinds of strange poisonous snakes rushed out from all directions. It was as if there was a grand gathering of the poisonous snake family here. Strange. Qin Wushuang immediately understood. This must be related to the strange words of the man in black. Could it be that the incantation that he was chanting could attract poisonous insects to wreak havoc? This was really too strange. After reaching the Xiantian realm, although his resistance to poisonous snakes had increased greatly, but with so many poisonous snakes rushing out at once, it was still quite troublesome to deal with. Qin Wushuang knew that this guy was using the poisonous snakes to search for him. Thinking of this, Qin Wushuang pointed his finger and a Zhongchong sword shot out. Chi! It shot out directly 30 meters away. Boom! A large tree was instantly knocked down by the power of the sword. The man in black heard the sound and turned his head. His face was filled with joy. He let out a sharp whistle and called the 2 flame cloud vultures. Then, he rushed towards the source of the sound. With a raise of his hand, shwa shwa shwa, more than a dozen snake-shaped alls shot out from his sleeves like meteors. The black-clothed man did not remain idle after the snake-shaped all appeared. With a turn of his body, a long snake-shaped whip appeared in his hand and wrapped around his wrist. With a few jerks, it was like a dancing silver dragon. The silver snake flicked its tongue and attacked. The snake-shaped whip was a soft weapon. If he didn't use it properly, he could easily injure himself. However, if it was used well, it would be unpredictable and extremely difficult to deal with. Looking at the black-robed man's technique, it was obvious that he was a veteran. The tip of the snake-shaped whip was a dart head, which had the strongest offensive power. It could be used for stabbing, whipping, entangling, and binding. It had many uses. The black-clothed man's whip contained a very powerful killing move behind it. If he couldn't hit the enemy, he could change it to binding the enemy with a flick of his wrist. If he hit the enemy with the whip, he could change it to a stab, directly penetrating the enemy and taking his life. However, he was still somewhat blind. Not to mention that Qin Wushuang wasn't there. Even if he was, he wouldn't be a clay statue waiting to be dealt with. The black-clothed man dared to be so bold because he had 2 flaming cloud vultures behind him, which completely solved his worries. Even if there was a sneak attack from behind, he didn't have to worry at all. However, Qin Wushuang's position just happened to be within the range of his right flank. As the black-clothed man's figure sped over, Qin Wushuang was calculating. 100 meters, 50 meters, 30 meters. With a flick of his wrist, the innate realm saber in his hand suddenly flew out like a meteor. He had gotten the saber from Li Wuji. Qin Wushuang wasn't good at using saber techniques, but it was very easy to use a saber as a hidden weapon. Moreover, he wasn't good at using a saber, but that was only relative to other saber experts. In fact, he had mastered many saber techniques, but those were not as good as Li Wuji's Tempest saber technique. Swoosh! The saber radiance flashed like a ray of white light horizontally. The black-clothed man clearly felt a ripple in the void and had already determined the direction of the attack. With a flick of his snake-shaped soft whip, like a real spiritual snake, it made a big turn and entangled towards the innate realm saber. At this moment, the 2 flaming cloud vultures behind him rushed over. Seeing Qin Wushuang take out his weapon, they both screeched and dived towards Qin Wushuang. They moved their claws and fangs and attacked at the same time. Qin Wushuang was overjoyed at the unexpected good news. He used the innate realm saber to attack the black-clothed man just now because he didn't have a more convenient hidden weapon. This saber was at the innate realm after all. It was very powerful, and the effect of a sneak attack would be much better. Who knew that these 2 beasts would take advantage of the fact that he didn't have a weapon and directly attack and defend with him? How could he not be overjoyed? Earlier, he had dealt with one of the flaming cloud vultures because that feathered beast was cunning and did not want to descend to the ground. Thus, he could not engage in close combat and could not enter his attack range. His thoughts flashed like lightning, and he already knew the reason. Most of the elite warriors of the upper sky spiritual martial force would carry a weapon with them to complement their upper sky power. And I shot out that saber to make these 2 beasts think that I don't have a weapon and my attack power has decreased greatly. I am no threat to them. As soon as he thought of this, he was overjoyed. His footsteps continued to move forward. He wanted to continue to create this illusion and lower the vigilance of these 2 beasts to the lowest. In the blink of an eye, the speed of these 2 flaming cloud vultures was indeed extraordinary. They arrived in front of Qin Wushuang in a few seconds. 2 pairs of sharp claws and fangs clawed at the void and covered the head of Qin Wushuang. Suddenly, Qin Wushuang stopped his body and retreated abruptly. Not only did he not run away, he charged forward. He stretched out his arms lightly, and his speed was extremely fast. His left and right hands moved at the same time. With a push of his thumb, the little Shang sword flew out of his hand like 2 torrents and charged out of the tip of his thumb. The speed of these 2 moves was too fast. From the jump to the stop and then to the counterattack, it was done in one breath. There seemed to be no pause in between, but the effect was shocking. Within a 10-meter radius, it was basically impossible to dodge the attack of the coagulated sword. Even if it were 2 spiritual beasts, they would not have such fast reaction speed. In this coagulated sword, the little Shang sword had the power of thunder, and its speed was comparable to lightning. The airflow rushed out in a range of 5 to 6 meters. If one wasn't on guard, it was impossible to have enough time to react, unless these 2 spiritual beasts knew how to teleport. Unfortunately, they did not. Almost at the same time, 2 mournful cries sounded. The 2 flaming cloud vultures were caught off guard and were hit by this tyrannical sword chi and fell down. At this moment, that man in black had only just caught that saber. In the blink of an eye, his left and right arms had been completely destroyed by the other party. The pupils of the man in black contracted. A chill gushed out from his body as he coldly stared at Qin Wushuang. He realized that he was about to face such a powerful opponent. You killed 3 of my flaming cloud vultures. I only have 3 flaming cloud vultures. The tone of the man in black was filled with sorrow, as if the ones that had died were not the 3 flaming cloud vultures, but his 3 brothers and sisters. Qin Wushuang stood far away on the crown of a large tree. He had to occupy a high altitude because there were too many poisonous snakes on the ground. Any one of them could possibly interfere with him in this battle. He did not wish for this battle to be interfered with by too many external forces. Now that the 2 spiritual beasts had been killed, Qin Wushuang's confidence in this battle had greatly increased. Who? Qin Wushuang suddenly smiled, his figure like lightning, darting backwards. This was his strategy. He had to find the most advantageous battle environment. This man in black was full of strangeness. Fighting in this place was still not very advantageous to Qin Wushuang. Only by constantly changing, constantly seeking changes, could he constantly grasp the initiative. His feet did not touch the ground at all as he dashed along the deep mountains and old forests. How could that man in black allow Qin Wushuang to escape? Relying on the soft whip, he was not slow at all as he chased after Qin Wushuang. At this moment, his hatred for Qin Wushuang could not be washed away even with all the water in the world. Qin Wushuang raised his head and looked ahead, only to see a rocky mound. The terrain of this place was as if it had been carved by a knife. Every rock was rugged and crisscrossed. The terrain was very strange, but there was one advantage. It was a barren land where not even a blade of grass grew. Here it is. Qin Wushuang tapped on the ground with the tip of his foot, continuously borrowing the strength of several large rocks, and stopped on a huge rock that was more than 100 feet high. In front of him was a tall mountain, and on the side was a cliff. This terrain was the most suitable for hand-to-hand combat. Since Qin Wushuang stopped, that man in black did not dare to neglect him. Despite his hatred, he also knew that this opponent before him was not easy to deal with. Not running anymore, the man in black did not conceal his monstrous anger. Qin Wushuang moved the corner of his mouth and laughed leisurely. Who said I was running? If you're not running, why are you in such a hurry like a stray dog? That man in black mocked him to his heart's content. I only want to find a good place for you to be buried. Humph, you talk big. That man in black sneered. Do you think that you have the right to talk big after killing 2 of my spiritual beasts? Qin Wushuang's face turned cold. I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. From the looks of it, you are not a disciple of the Stargaze Palace. You dare to use your spiritual beasts to fish in the territory of the Stargaze Palace. You have some guts? That man in black laughed coldly. What about it? Kid, just accept your bitter fate. After he had finished speaking, he urged the soft whip and waved his arm to create a few ripples in the air. Then, he wrapped it around the top of Qin Wushuang's head. Qin Wushuang stepped on the ground, and his figure disappeared from the place. That soft whip directly wrapped around the giant rock he was standing on, with a rumbling sound. Instantly, a part of the top of the giant rock was blasted off. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 155. Hi, the man in black sneered. Let's see where you can hide. Once again, he waved the soft whip and poured powerful spiritual chi into it. Suddenly, it was like a giant spear in his hand. He kept raising his arm and used the soft whip as a long spear. The length of the soft whip, the hardness of the long spear, and the ghostly attacks of an upper sky warrior. A storm of attacks, one after another, pierced out unceasingly. The speed was comparable to the attack power of a bow and arrow. And the upper sky, spiritual chi from this spear attack was also like an arrow. Its speed and power were not inferior. For a time, dozens of piercing attacks kept piercing towards Qin Wushuang's location. Boom, boom, boom. The power of this attack only caused the top of those giant rocks to be shaved off. This situation proved the old saying, the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. The attack power of the man in black wreaked havoc on this rocky hill. Qin Wushuang knew that now, the enemy was at his peak. Although he was not afraid to fight it head-on, it was unnecessary. Kid, let's see how long you can hide. The man in black laughed evilly. Suddenly, his mood changed again. He withdrew the spear and turned it into a smashing attack. He used a soft whip as a stick. This momentum was more suitable for slashing and smashing. It would double the destructive power of these giant rocks. It seemed that from his temperament, he was planning to raze this rocky hill to the ground. Clearly, this man in black is not someone from the Stargaze Palace. Or else, he would never fish in my territory. I wonder how many disciples of the Stargaze Palace have been ambushed by him. Qin Wushuang was not in a rush to fight with this man in black. He still walked leisurely with his immortal virtuous cloud steps. It was as if this rocky hill was the most beautiful scenery in the world. It was a wonderful enjoyment to walk around here. And in his eyes, the aggressive attacks of the man in black seemed to exist in name only. Qin Wushuang understood the art of battle. Especially for an upper sky warrior, it was important to grasp the temperament. The first burst of energy, the second would weaken, and the third would be exhausted. The black-robed man had gained the upper hand by a show of strength. Although he appeared to be very powerful, he was actually doing something useless. It was obviously not enough to deal with Qin Wushuang by relying on this kind of random punching to kill an old master. Qin Wushuang was the best at fighting in a chaotic battle, especially in this kind of terrain. Even if you could use your flexible whip in 100 different ways, it would still be useless. Compared to a flat plain, the advantage of weapons would be weakened. Do the disciples of the Stargaze Palace only know how to escape? When that man in black saw that Qin Wushuang did not fight with him and only dodged, he felt somewhat anxious inwardly. The battle between innates was so intense. Although this place was extremely remote and far from the headquarters of the Stargaze Palace, it was hard to guarantee that it would not attract the seniors of the Stargaze Palace. Once that happened, the situation would change instantly. Not to mention the strong ones, as long as a middle-stage elder came, it would be enough to kill him. In the past, he had used the flame cloud vultures to fish. Each time, he had succeeded through sneak attacks. As soon as he made a move, he would completely suppress the other party and would not give him any chance to turn the tables. And this time, he had encountered Qin Wushuang, this tough guy. Not only had he killed all 3 of his spiritual beasts, he had also dragged him into this long, drawn-out battle. His identity was destined to be shameful. As soon as he saw the light, he would be in danger of losing his life. After all, within the territory of the Stargaze Palace, it was a taboo to kill disciples of the palace. You talk a lot of nonsense. Whatever other skills you have, just use them. Qin Wushuang mocked him to his heart's content. You are afraid of the wolf in front and the tiger in the back. You want to kill me, but you're also afraid that the seniors of the Stargaze Palace will come. Ha ha. Unfortunately, the more you fear, the more likely it will happen. When I killed your first spiritual beast, I had already contacted the seniors of the Stargaze Palace. I believe that the entire virtuous Cloud Mountain range has become an iron bucket formation. Even if you can escape unscathed today, you will not walk out of the virtuous Cloud Mountain range. Lights flashed across the eyes of the man in black. Apparently, he could not judge the truth of Qin Wushuang's words. Only, for such matter, he would rather believe it than not. If it was as the other party had said, then he would be stuck in a deep quagmire. Before those elite warriors of the Stargaze Palace, his little strength was not enough. He could only sneak attack and deal with the disciples of the Stargaze Palace. He had always been careful and only moved around the virtuous Cloud Mountain range. He did not even go to the virtuous Cloud Mountain range. It was because inside the virtuous Cloud Mountain range, there were only core disciples. The strength of many core disciples made him feel fearful. Bang, bang, bang. The continuous rumbling sounds made the entire cliff tremble. Each time a man in black swung his stick, the power was astonishing. It rolled up waves of destructive power like raging waves. Like a sweeping wave, it spread over with the power to topple the mountains and overturn the seas. He must admit that the attacking power of this man in black was indeed astonishing. Only, the more ferocious his attacks were, the happier Qin Wushuang felt inwardly. It was because he had clearly sensed that the other party's mentality had started to change. Especially after his words a moment ago, the other party's heart had started to waver and cracks had appeared. To an upper sky warrior, this was fatal. In a battle between upper sky warriors, they were most afraid of being impetuous and not having a strong will. The more it was like this, the more troublesome it would be. Boom! Another stick smashed towards Qin Wushuang. Qin Wushuang still had that carefree smile on his face. As if his feet had been smeared with oil, instead of retreating, he charged towards the man in black. This charge surprised the black-clothed man a little. Suddenly, the soft whip changed its temperament and returned to its snake form. In fact, it had turned around and rolled back. Whoosh, 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 it wrapped 3 times around Qin Wushuang's chest, waist, and legs. The power of these 3 rolls had a name called 3 turns around a tree. 3 rounds in a row. Each round had the power of an inner bind. Unexpectedly, Qin Wushuang's body was like a slippery fish. Although he had clearly entered his attack range, he suddenly slid away. Like a wave rushing over, he directly rushed into the distance. These 3 rounds had failed once again. Humph! The man in black snorted and took advantage of the situation to step forward. The soft whip shot out and followed the direction that Qin Wushuang had bounced off. He wanted to take advantage of this momentum to follow up continuously until Qin Wushuang was bound to death. Qin Wushuang's toes moved continuously as he stepped on a huge rock. Tung, tung, tung. The speed of the man in black was not the slightest bit slow. He continued to follow up. A snake-shaped whip spat out thousands of rays of light and countless whip shadows, always entangling. This time, he was determined to entangle the other party to death. This snake-shaped soft whip is used for entanglement. Its long-range attack power is not strong. Only when the spiritual power is channeled can it form an attack like a stick or a spear. It's impossible for him to gather the strengths of 100 schools of thought. Thinking of this, his feet did not slow down at all. He continued to leap higher and higher until he had already reached the top of the cliff. This cliff was very steep and the slope was almost perpendicular to the bottom. Qin Wushuang suddenly turned around and directly rushed down. This time, Qin Wushuang's choice was extremely strange. He directly swooped down in the direction of the man in black's soft whip. The man in black laughed. "There's no way to escape, right?" Suddenly, his face turned cold. "Since it's like this, then die." As his words fell, the soft whip shook and once again turned into a spear, thrusting straight up. Humph! Qin Wushuang's body slightly tilted, avoiding the dart head in front of the soft whip. Following the long whip straight down, his 2 palms suddenly grabbed the soft whip directly. The man in black's reaction was not slow. He changed his move again, once again turning into a coiling soft whip, and rolled down. At this time, his face suddenly changed. His right hand holding the soft whip suddenly trembled. The next moment, he unexpectedly felt his own dantian tremble, as if the spiritual power in his body was suddenly pulled by something. Spiritual power leaked out. The man in black's face changed greatly, looking at Qin Wushuang in surprise. Qin Wushuang tightly grasped the soft whip with both hands. His thumbs pressed on the soft whip and quickly operated the power of Deep North. A carefree and comfortable feeling continuously entered through his thumbs toward the Shanzhong point. The power of Deep North was indeed worthy of its reputation. Qin Wushuang was overjoyed. He repeatedly operated the technique, attacking the man in black's defense line. If someone was watching this scene, their jaw would inevitably drop. It was really too strange. 2 innate masters were fighting. A moment ago, one of them was still being chased around by the other. Suddenly, the next moment, the situation took a 180-degree turn. The one being chased suddenly grabbed the soft whip, and the man in black who was chasing seemed to have suddenly petrified, like a piece of wood, waiting to be slaughtered. He was not a pure wooden man. At least, the man in black's expression was constantly changing, from the initial shock to fear and then to despair. From his eyes, there was clearly some disbelief and doubt. How could this be? How could the spiritual power that he had painstakingly cultivated be directly absorbed by the opponent through the soft whip? Almost in the blink of an eye, the black-clothed man who had been full of vigor a moment ago had completely changed his appearance. His face was full of wrinkles, his hair was white, and his body was like a dried eggplant, dry and ugly, without any elasticity. Qin Wushuang completely ignored the man in black. He sat cross-legged and absorbed the spiritual power from the man in black to his heart's content. This wave of spiritual power was much stronger than that of the flame cloud vulture. And it was also the spiritual power of a spiritual martial force warrior, so it was much more efficient than that of a spiritual beast. In a moment, he had completely digested it in his dantian and merged it into his sea of qi, becoming a part of his spiritual power. Qin Wushuang secretly felt lucky. This battle was much more difficult than the battle with Li Wuji, especially this man in black. His methods were much more powerful than Li Wuji's. If he did not use all kinds of factors and the newly cultivated power of Deep North, it would not be easy to kill this person. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 156. Along the way, he ended the remaining life of this man in black and started to loot. He learned from the martial saint that the first thing an upper sky warrior would do after a battle was to rob the other party's equipment. This was the spoils of war and a reward for winning a bloody battle. Only all the equipment on this man in black were gathered in one bag. This bag was only the size of a fist. However, it had a large flexible space inside. It was a miraculous storage bag. This kind of storage bag was no small matter. Even those elders in the Stargaze Palace might not have it. After all, to a martial artist, such a bag that could control space was too useful. An upper sky warrior would more or less have some good stuff. Without such storage equipment, these good stuff would take up a lot of space and would not be easy to carry around. However, with this storage bag, the problem of taking up a lot of space was solved. Although this storage bag appeared to be the size of a fist, it had an area of about 10 square meters in his former world. If he were to hide things, he would not know how many good things it could store. Qin Wushuang was overjoyed at this turn of events. This was indeed an unexpected gain. Since he had this storage bag, he was not in a rush to check the equipment. Inwardly, he was still thinking about those two flame cloud vultures. He did not want to let others take advantage of him. No one would be happy to let others take advantage of him while he was bleeding and risking his life. After putting that soft whip into the bag, Qin Wushuang kicked the body of that man in black down the sheer cliff. Then he rushed back to the original place. In a moment, he had returned to the place where the battle had started. The two flame cloud vultures were still at the original place. Overjoyed, Qin Wushuang put these two flame cloud vultures into the bag. He also put away the upper sky blade that he had used to sneak attack the man in black. After he had finished these things, Qin Wushuang did not stay any longer. For sure, that battle a moment ago would have alerted many people. He believed that soon, this place would become a lively place. He did not want the whole world to know about his little gain. Making a fortune in silence was the hard truth of the martial arts world. After running for a day, he finally slowed down when he was 2,000 or 3,000 miles away from the scene of the incident. Now that we're here, we should be almost safe. If others want to fight to the death, that's their business. I'll first find a place to take inventory of the man in black storage bag. It looks like there are a few things inside. Although it's not rich, it's not shabby either. With this thought in mind, Qin Wushuang began to look for a place to hide. After many rounds of exploration, He eliminated any danger in this place. Then he picked a cave and went in. Opening the storage bag, Qin Wushuang was rather puzzled. Why didn't he feel the loss of spiritual energy from the flame cloud vulture's inner core this time? The flame cloud vulture was already dead, and regardless of whether or not its core was extracted, it should have lost its spiritual power, because its signs of life had already stopped. Without the support of life force, its inner core would naturally die. This could be said to be common knowledge. But this time, he had been in a hurry for a whole day, and there was no loss at all. Overjoyed, Qin Wushuang decided to observe the flaming cloud vulture for a while longer. Can it be that this bag of holding can also nurture spiritual power? Naturally, he didn't need to pay attention to the soft whip. Qin Wushuang had already fully experienced its effects. It was very difficult to deal with. Qin Wushuang simply wanted to play with it. But this was a matter for another time. Qin Wushuang wasn't in a hurry. After looking through the other things, the first thing that caught his eye was a simple and unadorned scroll. This scroll's shape was very peculiar, and one could tell at a glance that it wasn't an ordinary item. Qin Wushuang took it out and saw 4 words written on it: Catalog of the Language of Beasts. These 4 words immediately aroused Qin Wushuang's strong interest. After a little thought, he immediately came to a few preliminary conclusions. That man in black was able to subdue and use the spirit birds for his own use. I thought that it was some special ability, but it seems that he relied on this catalog of the language of beasts. And in the previous battle, that guy's lips moved a few times and made a series of strange sounds. Even the poisonous snakes were attracted. This must have benefited from this book. When Qin Wushuang thought of this, he secretly exclaimed, "This is really good stuff. I've struck it rich this time." After putting away the catalog of the language of beasts, he inspected the other items. Apart from the catalog of the language of beasts, there was another secret manual. It was a Xiantian cultivation method that corresponded to the snake-shaped soft whip. Such cultivation methods couldn't be too much, and it didn't matter if there were less of them. But since he had obtained it, it was definitely not a bad thing to keep it. After throwing it to one side and counting again, he discovered that there were a few other spiritual herbs and spiritual items. After counting, there were a total of 5 spiritual items. 3 of them were spiritual herbs and spiritual flowers, and the other 2 were spiritual stones and minerals. Although their uses were still unknown, they were obviously not ordinary items. The last 2 items piqued Qin Wushuang's interest. One of them was an identity jade token. On it, 2 spirited words were engraved: Xianming. Qin Wushuang pondered for a moment. He couldn't figure out the meaning of the 2 words Xianming, so he didn't think about it. He threw the jade token into his storage bag. Then he picked up the last item. It was a piece of old sheepskin, and many strange routes had been hand-drawn on it. Qin Wushuang was dazzled when he saw all the twists and turns. He roughly judged that it was a map. However, there was no indication as to where this map was located. Qin Wushuang smiled bitterly. It seems that this guy had a lot of secrets. Unfortunately, after this guy died, whether it was the map or the identity jade token, I'm afraid that they will all become a mystery. At that moment, he didn't bother to think about it. He packed up everything. Once again, he sat cross-legged and began to cultivate. He had gained a lot from this trip, especially the development of the power of Deep North. It could be said that he had created a new era in his cultivation history. The use of the power of the Deep North and the combination of the coagulated sword was flawless. The combination was perfect and flawless. There were no flaws. The attack of the coagulated sword and the absorption ability of the power of Deep North could be said to be within the scope of the initial stage of the spiritual martial force. Qin Wushuang didn't need to be afraid of any opponent. Of course, he also knew that there was a big taboo of the Deep North. That was when he encountered an opponent stronger than himself. This absorption method might not work, and it was very likely that there would be a counterforce, and instead, his spiritual power would leak out. If he wanted to absorb an opponent stronger than him, unless the opponent had no power to resist or could not stop him from absorbing, he still needed to use the power of deep north carefully. The power of deep north absorbs the spiritual power of upper sky warriors. It's a bit undeserved. It's not appropriate for me to take the initiative to catch people and absorb their spiritual power. However, if someone came to find trouble, it would be a disaster if I don't take it. Qin Wushuang also had his principles. He would not take the initiative to absorb people he had no grudges with. After all, it would be too outrageous. It was not easy for everyone to reach the upper sky spiritual martial force. However, if they were like that man in black and came to find trouble, he would not be polite. The key to absorbing the spiritual power is to transform it. And the process of transforming the spiritual power does not seem to be as complicated as the 6 questions of absorbing spiritual power said. Why is that? It was mentioned in the 6 questions of absorbing spiritual power that the absorption of spiritual power would take up at most 10% of the time, and the time to transform and merge the spiritual power would take up 90%. And the process of transforming and using the spiritual power was extremely complicated and a long process. The strength of this process would also determine the speed of the upper sky warriors training. Thus, it would differentiate between the strong and the weak in the spiritual martial force. In other words, the speed of absorbing the spiritual power would not be slow even if it was not directly absorbed, but merged with the power of nature during training. The most crucial step was to transform and merge the spiritual power into one with the sea of spiritual power in the Dantian. This was the most difficult part of the training process of the upper sky spiritual martial force. However, for this difficult part, Qin Wushuang did not feel the difficulty mentioned in the 6 questions of absorbing spiritual power. It was clearly mentioned that during the process of transforming, the spiritual power would cleanse the meridians, muscles, bone marrow, and even the skin. This was a specific manifestation of the so-called bearing capacity of the body. During this process, if any part of the body could not withstand the invasion of the external spiritual energy, the spiritual energy would backfire, break through the sea of qi, destroy the Dantian, and take over the body, thus devouring the body. Thus, during the training process of the upper sky spiritual martial force, not only would the training of the body not weaken, but it would become even stronger. If any upper sky spiritual martial force neglected to strengthen the body, then the fate that awaited him would be extremely miserable. The result could be imagined. Could it be that when I absorb the spiritual power directly, the impact would be less than the spiritual power absorbed through normal training? This doesn't make sense. Qin Wushuang still did not understand. Generally speaking, there were 2 situations of absorbing spiritual power. One was to understand the nature of the world and absorb the spiritual power through gradual training. To put it bluntly, this was a slow process. For example, when Qin Wushuang absorbed the inner pellet of the flame cloud vulture or the Dantian of the man in black, it was all direct absorption. It was a completely unconventional and quick process. Since it was impossible to absorb the spiritual power directly, it would be better to do it step by step. The path of Kanate Dao is truly arduous and full of doubts. It seems that if I have the chance, I must ask teacher. With such a question in mind, Qin Wushuang decided to ask his teacher when he had the chance. Thinking about how his teacher Tan Zhongqi had treated him, Qin Wushuang felt rather warm. In his previous life, he had a mysterious old man who had taken him in and taught him ancient martial arts. He was grateful to him for the rest of his life. He did not expect that in this life, he would still have a teacher who took care of him. This was the blessing of 2 lifetimes. With a sigh, Qin Wushuang continued to organize the spiritual qi in his Dantian. A part of the spiritual qi he had absorbed from the man in black still needed to be merged. Qin Wushuang decided to play it safe and not absorb the inner pellets of those 2 flame cloud vultures. Instead, he would merge the absorbed spiritual qi into his chest meridian and use it for his own use. Qin Wushuang kept reminding himself that he must not bite off more than he could chew. In his previous life, he had used too much of his genuine chi to break through forcefully. It had caused him to go mad and die because of the backlash. In this world, the martial arts world was so exciting. He must not repeat the same mistake. P.S. Today, at least 5 chapters. This is the minimum. Yesterday, I missed 2 chapters. If everything goes well today, perhaps I can pay off yesterday's debt. There's also hope for 6 chapters. It will depend on tonight's performance. Warriors of the Galaxy, it's almost the end of the year exam. I hope you will work hard and let Wu Shuang get a good grade. Haha, let's not talk about the pretentious stuff. Let's get straight to the point. I need your support. Tonight, I will give it my all. Hopefully, Warriors of the Galaxy will also search your pockets. If you have any monthly votes, give it to me. To be continued. If you want to know about the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.